Tuesday, May 12th. Welcome to the Board of Public Works, Edward R. Rothbell hearing room. We've been joined by the Honorable Councilor Cedars-Sinai. We are anticipating Councilman Rice. We have one of those fun agendas today. Well, hopefully we can move through quite a few rather quickly, seeing that several do not have speaker cards and others have quite a few. So we'll do a little balancing here. Hopefully we'll get done before the Laker game, so be patient. But just kidding. Our items will be such that when we ask you to come to the microphone, we call your name, give us your name and address. Speak closely to the microphone because you can tell our acoustics are not the greatest in this room. If you need to have a conversation, please take it outside. That way we can hear not only the speaker, but also the items that are before us. When you do come to the microphone, keep an eye on the clock. And Barbara, can you level that out a little bit more so we can see it as well? So we have 2 minutes on the items, and if we change it, we will notify you before that item. Many of you have written eloquent letters with a lot of detail and support your argument. So don't find yourself in the position where you don't get to your conclusion. So assess what you've written and try to make it within those 2 minutes. It's okay to say I agree with the previous speaker if there's nothing new to add that we should consider as a committee. So we would appreciate your cooperation there as well, so that we can move forward on each item. The items before us are several that are on consent, and in being that Councilman Sawyer's here, we do have a quorum. So items 1 through 9, Councilmember, actually 1 through 7, we can have on consent. Second. Item 8, see no cards. We will continue to June 9th in this committee, and hopefully the council on June 23rd. Item number 9 will also be continued to June 9th. I'm assuming, Barbara, that will be also June 23rd in council?
For this item, there's no requirement for a council date.
Okay.
So we're just going to wait until the 9th.
Okay, so now make sure. Items 10 and 11 are called special, given the cards we do have. Item 12, special. Item 13, we don't have cards there. We can go on consent on that one, Councilmember. Second. Item 14, we do have cards. Quite a few cards. Item 15, we do have our Director of Planning, Gail Goldberg, with us.
No, he has a card on that.
And item 16, we will continue to 9/19. So, I do know we have several officers on item 10. So Director Goldberg, if you don't mind, we can take that once we get the officers back on the street as quick as possible. And then we'll come to you. Then we'll go to then we'll take it one step at a time after that. So item number 10, can we get Roberto a summary on that one?
Yes, Councilman, this is an appeal that is being filed by the owner and the operator relative to an action of the zoning administrator as it relates to a revocation case for a restaurant nightclub that is located in CD3 known as Club Red Square.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, committee members and chair of the committee. Sue Cheng from Planning Department. I'm trying to adjust my microphone to my short height. The subject case number DIR 2008-2330 RV is for the property located at 19973, 19975, and 2001 West Ventura Boulevard. This site is zoned C4 and is improved with a one-story restaurant, bar, or you call it nightclub, formerly known as Club Red Square and currently known as Ventura Lounge. This club was previously operated by Mike Nicole, who was the previous owner of the business owner of Red Square Club since the year 2005. However, the business was recently sold to a new owner, Mr. Yavan Manukian, and the club had a name change to Ventura Lounge. There are allegations of nuisance activity at the site, and public hearing was conducted to obtain public testimony regarding the operation of the club. At the hearing, the residents testified that the neighbors noticed the nuisance activities at the site since 2005, when the prior owner, Mike Nicole, purchased a business known as Red Square Club. The residents claim that this premise is not a restaurant, but is rather a bar, nightclub, or lounge. There are no dining tables or chairs inside. The site has open space in the middle, and only cushions is available inside the premise. The premise is not open during the week, and they only open for weekend nights only, Friday from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and Saturday from 10 p.m. to 3 p.m. And there is no food to order at this subject location. The residents complained about crack pipes, syringes, broken bottles, condoms, and other obscene items in their front lawns and around the club. The residents also complained about nuisance activities such as narcotics, loitering, excessive noise, traffic violation, fighting, vandalism, public urination, graffiti, illegal parking, lewd conduct, public drunkenness, drinking in public, gang activities, trash and debris, overcrowding at the club, and spillover crowds obstructing traffic on Ventura Boulevard, residential parking, noise, and criminal activities. One college student testified that she could not study at all, especially after 10 p.m. due to excessive noise from this club. There have been fights, yelling, gunshots, and so many public nuisance activities on residential streets and police helicopters in the area in the middle of the night. The adjacent business owners also complained of spillover problems and nuisance activities on their business parking lots. There have been violations with the ABC rules and regulations, resulting in disciplinary actions that include suspension of the ABC license. I understand that we have LAPD officers here to speak for themselves, so I just skip the testimony which was given at the hearing by LAPD officers. The LAPD officers just one comment that they receive service calls at the site 2 to 3 times per night. That can tell you the volume of the complaining generated from this location. Also, dancing is not allowed at the site. There is no evidence that the dancing was permitted at this location. LAPD officers informed the zoning administrator that their dancing permit was denied by LAPD, but they continue to offer dancing at the subject location. Based on testimonies and information received to the file, the Director of Planning determined that the use on the subject site is a public nuisance and adversely impacts the surrounding residential and commercial uses. In order to correct such nuisance activities, 32 operating conditions are imposed as a part of a director's determination. The appellants, Yavon Manukian, the new business owner of the Ventura Lounge, and Oji Avenari, on behalf of Paradise Investments, which is the property owner of this location, are appealing the entire decision of the director's determination. This club has a long history of violation with the applicable rules and regulations, resulting in detrimental impacts to surrounding neighborhood. The required conditions are intended to correct such nuisance activities. Without corrective measures, nuisance activities would continue. Therefore, staff recommends denial of the appeals, and I'll be available for your question. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I'd like to ask the officers, we have with us Sergeant Daisy Orlick, Habib Munoz, Officer Charles Dens, like to come on up, and Officer Chan Sabazian. Again, I understand we need to have our presence out in the community, so I was trying to move you guys up first so we can hear your report and not have you here all afternoon. But the microphone is yours, so we'd like to give your report and offer this committee your insight as to this case.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Sergeant Desi Ehrlich. I'm the current officer in charge of the Topanga Vice Unit in Topanga area, and we have the primary responsibility of overseeing the bars and restaurants in our area, including Ventura Lounge, formerly known as Club Red Square. Prior to Topanga area opening on January 4th of 2009, I was assigned to Operations Valley Bureau, where I also played a role in the oversight of Ventura Lounge. And so I'm familiar with some of their history and the activity that has occurred in the location and around the location, including drunk service arrests, DUI, narcotics offenses, noise violations, consuming alcohol on their patio and they're not permitted to do that, contaminated beverages and bottles of alcohol, violations of their use permits, security guards with no permits. When we opened on January 4th of 2009, I contacted CID just to check on their permits. They don't have any any permits for cafe entertainment show and or dance hall. They advertise regularly for dance hall and CES with comedy shows. On March 28th, we conducted an undercover investigation inside the location. We had male and female officers both enter the business. The female officers went in undercover posing as customers. Female officers went in for free. They charged the male officers, which is a violation of a business and professions code for gender discrimination. There were also a DJ. They were playing live music. And there was about 20 to 30 patrons dancing on a dance floor designated just for dancing. Also on that day, the DJ was using a microphone to entice the crowd, having him, having the patrons yell and scream and wave their hands, that sort of thing. On April 18th, we checked their website and they were advertising for a nightclub called Club La Diosa. On that night, we went in at 7:30 in the afternoon, and at 7:30 in the afternoon, they had a comedy show where there were 5 comedians performing on stage. At about 9 o'clock, that ended, and about 10 o'clock, they opened up for the nightclub, where a DJ came in. They began playing Hispanic-type hip-hop music, and the dance floor opened up. They pushed some tables aside, and patrons were dancing on the dance floor. On April 25th, yes?
You did mention a March 28th date. I just want to make sure for the record, if you give us the year, as you give us the dates of the month and day, we can also include the year so we can be consistent on the record.
Okay. I apologize. That was and that's March 28th of 2009. The second day was April 18th of 2009. That's where they advertised for the club La Diosa. We went in again on April 25th, 2009. Prior to going in, we checked their website again, and they were advertising for rock and roll night. On that night we went in, they were having live rock and roll bands. There was approximately 20 people dancing on the dance floor when we got in, and the crowd grew as the night went on. In addition, on that night, we observed the current owner, Yarvan Manukian, and the former owner, Mike Nickel, walking around inside directing security guards, the bar manager. And I bring that up because Mike Nickel says he sold the business, but he's still there regularly, and if nothing else, managing the club. On that night, we cited, we went in with undercover, with uniform officers, and cited Mr. Yarvan Manukian, the current owner, for not having a CES permit, his dance hall permit. We also checked the guard cards for the security guards. 2 of the 5 of them did not have their valid guard cards. We cited one of them. The second one turned out to be a 17-year-old minor that he was employing in the nightclub. We completed a crime report for contributing to the delinquency of that minor.
Sergeant, just for the record, CES is an acronym for?
Cafe, Entertainment, and Show.
Okay.
On May 9th of 2009, we went in and just did an upfront inspection. After warning Mr. Manukian and Nickel regarding having the permits, the dance hall and the cafe entertainment show permits. When we walked in, we observed 20 to 30 people dancing on the dance floor. We asked a security guard where Mr. Manukian is, and he said he's in the back cooking food that is required under their Type 47 ABC license. We walked into the kitchen. It was pretty much a sterile environment. There was no food being cooked there. Went to the back office, and Mr. Manukian was there watching the crowds over his closed-circuit TV. Again, we cited him for not having his dance hall permit. We told him that he had to have people stop dancing. He can remain open as a restaurant, but not as a nightclub as he had been operating. We left the location on that night. About 20 to 30 minutes later, a radio call came out at that business for a group fight with shots fired. We returned to the area along with patrol officers, but the groups had dispersed. Now, I'd like to end by just saying that they're licensed to be a restaurant and bar. It's okay to serve alcohol, but they have to serve food in conjunction with that, and they haven't been doing that. They advertise just on Friday and Saturday nights for comedy shows and as a club. Nothing in this business shows that it's a restaurant at all. There's every once in a while they'll have pizza, but that's about it. In addition to the problems that are occurring inside the location, parking is a serious issue. They've got just a few parking spaces to the rear of the business, and that's primarily designated for their employees. So the hundreds of patrons that visit this club are going in the neighborhoods behind Ventura Lounge. And then that's where the neighbors are having issues with the garbage and bottles and fights and just loud talking at up until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. In addition to that, we've logged 20 radio calls just at that address alone. When radio calls come out, sometimes they'll be to an intersection or a neighboring address where the person that's reporting the call is calling from. We've logged 20 calls just in the year of 2008 up until the point that Topanga opened on January 4th, 2009, directly related to that business. And that is all I've got.
Well, that's quite a bit, actually. Are there any other officers who would like to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Just give us your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Habib Munoz, H-A-B-I-B-M-U-N-O-Z. I'm a sergeant currently assigned to Operations Valley Bureau Violent Crime Task Force. I'm here to talk about some of the things that I saw as an undercover investigator involving the Red Square at the time. I joined the West Valley Vice Unit in February of 2006, once again as an undercover investigator. It was quickly identified to me by my supervisors, other investigators in the unit, the problematic locations, and the one that always seemed to come, up on top was the Red Square. One of the first tasks that I handled was I conducted a background check on the Red Square, which required me searching and copying arrest reports, crime reports, any incident reports that had happened at that location. I went back probably about a year, from early 2006, so most of 2005, and I found numerous, crime reports for, batteries, assaults, arrest reports for people urinating in public outside of the bar, vandalism reports that were filed by the neighboring businesses, including a crime report for a rape that had happened inside the club and a shooting that happened just outside of the club. Once again, as an undercover investigator, it was very easy for me and my other partners to go outside and monitor the outside of the facility. We did that on a regular basis, mainly on the weekends when it was open. And some of the things that I saw was, first of all, was just the way they managed the crowd. The first problem was that the location is obviously on Ventura Boulevard on the on the north side of the street. Very limited parking. So most of these people that are attending this club have to park in the surrounding neighboring businesses or across the street. There's no immediate crosswalks in the area. People would have to go about a block and a half away to use the crosswalk to cross, but we all know they won't do that. They would just cross in the unlawfully, basically jaywalking. That presented a traffic problem for the vehicular traffic that was going east and west on Ventura Boulevard. The other thing that I saw outside of the club was the way the club organizers would line up the people, the patrons outside of the club, which basically they put them in a line in front of the building, blocking the sidewalk, long lines, which again, it created problems. Regular pedestrians that had to cross through there, half the time, needed to get through these crowds. The other thing that it would do is it also created a traffic problem where cars that would, going by there, especially, younger adults would stop and, try to engage the females that were in line in conversations. At the end, when the clubs would let out the patrons, some of the things that I saw from monitoring this place was a lot of intoxicated people that would come out, once again, jaywalk across the street, in between cars. I saw fights outside of the street. There's some residential streets just south of the location with probably almost to, close to $1 million homes where people would park their cars in front of, urinate outside of their locations. Once again, leave at a high rate of speed, loud music, yelling, screaming. I mean, just disturbing all the neighbors in the area. On one particular occasion, as I was monitoring the place, I saw a luxury car, an Infiniti G35, coming westbound on Ventura Boulevard at a high rate of speed, actually do a 180 in front of the bar as people were coming in and out, crossing the street, and go back the other way at a high rate of speed, fishtailing out of the location. This was almost like on a every weekend basis. Now, once I started working inside the club, once again in an undercover capacity, I saw a number of violations. First of all was patrons, very intoxicated. They were still getting served alcohol. Minors in the location, the dancing, the overcrowding, and a couple of times we actually called the fire department to come on and come in and clear the location and do what we call with a clicker to see how many people they had in there. There was a mention about the lack of food. The times that I was there, I never saw a menu. We did order some food, and it was out of a dry erase board on the wall that they had about 4 different items, finger foods, mainly quesadillas, things like that. Never in any of the time that I was there did I get a full menu or a full meal out of that place. I talk about the intoxicated patrons inside of the bar. One particular occasion, in the men's bathroom, I walked in and they had the urinal actually went all the way down to the ground, with the drain at the bottom of it. I actually saw a gentleman passed out with his face on top of the drain in the bathroom. Two of his friends came, grabbed him, took him out of the bar and outside of the establishment. There was some mention about the patio, a patio where they were not supposed to drink. I regularly saw patrons drinking outside in that patio as well. The music was just way too loud. It was just way too crowded in there, which created a whole set of problems, agitated people, upset people. You're bumping into people. They're knocking your drinks over. The bar is 2-3 rows of people to try to get a drink. It just upset everybody. Also the bouncers. There were several bouncers there, all dressed in black, some fairly muscular guys. And, they also, other than their presence, it really didn't seem like they were trying to enforce many of the violations that were going on. Yes, sir.
You've given us a lot of detail for the record. Is there more to add? There's a lot more to add?
You know what? If I could just take a few more seconds.
Please.
A couple other things that happened while I was there is there was a actual beating right outside of the club from patrons, where the victim actually ended up dying a few days later. So it was actually turned into a homicide. But approximately a month to 2 months after that, I was working inside the club, and the detectives had been at the location talking to some of these people regarding what actually had turned into a homicide now. While we were doing an operation, we heard from some of the bouncers that the suspects from the beating were actually in line waiting to get in. We notified some of the officers that were outside, and they actually took those guys into custody. But once again, it's just, I could sit here and talk for about an hour and tell you everything that I saw over a 2-year period. And the last thing I would like to say is I've been on the job about 14 years on, and there's never been a situation where we've addressed that we've not handled properly. This place was a problem before I got to the vice unit in 2006. I left in 2008. Here I am a year and a half later, and we're still having an issue with this place. So I think definitely we need to be a little bit more aggressive and take care of this once and for all. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you for your hard work, and I appreciate your insight and your detail, because that will help us on the record to achieve the goals that we need to achieve to create some level of compatibility and harmony in this area. Please identify yourself, sir.
Yeah, hi. My name is Officer Salvazian, and I'm currently assigned to Topanga Vice. And I'm also in charge of the ABC coordinator. I just wanted to briefly touch up on the 2 instances that I went into Ventura Lounge as an undercover officer. First of all, I just wanted to state that their license is a Type 47 license, which is only for on-sale restaurant license that allows sales of beer, wine, and distilled spirits only. They have a website, and on their website, they advertise that they have a cover, they have live bands, dancing, DJ, and advertise for 21 and over. They also advertise that they're open from 10 to 2. They have go-go dancers every Friday and Saturday, and stand-up comedy that starts at 7:30 before the club starts. And they advertise how they have Latin music, hip-hop, and club hits. On March 28th, 2009, the Topanga Vice conducted an undercover investigation at this location. I observed a large crowd to get in, and security searching patrons and charging a cover charge. Our female investigator was allowed in for free, and males were charged $5 in violation of gender discrimination. Outside, I observed a designated dance floor with about 20 to 30 patrons dancing to the DJ music in violation of 103.106, dance hall permit required. Additionally, the DJ and the MC was walking around the stage area using a microphone to entice the crowd, encouraging the patrons to yell, scream, and wave their hands in the air in violation of 103.102, the cafe entertainment and show permit. Additionally, on April 18th, myself and fellow vice officers went into Ventura Lounge as an undercover basis. We checked the website once again, and it advertised that there was a comedy show that started at 7:30, and after that, Club de Soya was going to start at about 10 o'clock. My partner called Ventura Lounge and made a reservation for 4. She was advised by Big Mike that there was going to be a $10 cover charge per person. My partners and I conducted the undercover investigation and entered the lounge and paid $10 for cover. We spent approximately 3 hours inside the location. During the time, approximately 10 patrons were present for the comedy and entertainment show. Additionally, we observed a female on the stage singing to the crowd. After the musical act, the comedy show started. There were 5 comedic acts and then another female singer who closed the show. The employees of the Ventura Lounge then moved approximately 8 tables from the dance floor and to the west side of the business, and after the show ended, Ventura Lounge opened and the club opened. The disc jockey then began playing the music and shortly afterwards, my partners and I, we observed about 15 to 20 people dancing on the dance floor.
Thank you, sir. Again, thank you for your hard work. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How you doing? I want to thank the committee for your time. I'm Senior Lead Officer Charles Dinsey. I'm currently assigned to LAPD Topanga Division and assigned responsible for the Woodland Hills area, where the Red Square now Ventura Lounge is located. As Senior Lead Officer, one of my responsibilities is to be the pulse of the community and deal with such things as nuisance locations. Ventura Lounge has been a nuisance to the community for approximately 6 years. I base this on such things as the numerous crimes, citizen complaints, arrests, and radio calls generated at this location. The nuisance at this location is clear by the number of police officers and community members that are here to speak on behalf of the blight the establishment brings to the community of Woodland Hills. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, sir. We do have with us Mr. William Larson of the State Attorney's Office. And is there any more information you can share with us? The role you play, sir, and I want to thank you for the hard work you achieved in District 1. So I can see you're doing a great job in other parts of the city.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. What I'm going to add is basically just a quick overview of the nuisance activity that's been going on at this place. I'm not officially taking a position on this, but I am just going to inform the committee of the type of activity we've had. You've already heard from a number of people from the police department as to the nuisance activity, but we have, going back over years, we have robberies, rapes, homicide, numerous batteries. It just goes on and on and on. You got vandalism and everything else. What hasn't been mentioned here thus far has been the gang component of this. In a number of these arrests, based upon what I have read and also in my conversations with other gang officers, one of whom is on the Glendale Police Department. His name is Nick Orloff. He was unable to be here today because he was injured on duty. But we have a gang which is known as Armenian Power. Armenian Power is a criminal organization that runs all the way from Woodland Hills. They'll go into Studio City, they'll come into east parts of Hollywood and go on to Glendale. And there's almost like a circuit that these guys will run from club to club. And this is one of the locations where they go when they're committing criminal activity. At the same time, when they're inside these clubs, a number of these batteries are directly caused because other gang members from Canoga Park, Alabama, which is a Hispanic gang, and other gangs are coming into this same location. So when the members of these two or three different gangs, we've had gang members coming from over the hill, from South Los Angeles, from Sylmar, from other parts of the city. They're all coming to this club to congregate. They meet each other, and then when the gang members from one gang meet the gang members from another gang, we have all these incidents like the homicide that was referenced by one of the other officers. And you still have the members of this club involved in all sorts of criminal activity. We've got people coming in here and doing all types of activity that's illegal, and that's, again, what is generating a lot of this activity. And for them to say, which I think you'll hear, that there's been a diminution in the amount of criminal or nuisance activity, we still have these arrests that just occurred here this last weekend and the weekend before that, which are all still pending cases. So again, the amount of activity that's been going on in this club is truly, it's far more excessive than you will find in other locations in the Western Valley.
Okay, thank you, City Attorney Larson, for your hard work and that detail. We do have next the appearance on this case. I believe we have Uzi Admiral and Go Malukian. Like to come on up, identify yourself and your
Good afternoon. My name is Uzi Avneri. I'm the owner, actually I'm the secretary of Paradise Investments. Paradise Investments is the owner of this property. We've owned it for the last 6 years or so. I am disgusted. I'm disgusted with what I'm hearing, the allegations, gang activity, drugs. It shouldn't be there. We don't want to be the one that own a place like that. We know there was a problem when there was a previous operator, Red Square. There was problems. I got calls, neighbors. We immediately called the previous owner. We've asked the previous owner to either give us back the place or work out something so there wouldn't be any violations. He sold the previous owner sold it to the new owner, and ever since then I haven't heard any complaints. This is the first time I hear that there is complaints. When I asked Mr. Bill Larson, he said that most of the allegations were dating back to the Red Square days. So the Ventura Lounge, I haven't heard any problem. I don't want to be the owner of a place that has these problems. However, I haven't heard any complaints other than what Bill Larson, who, in my opinion, may have a personal vendetta against this place here. The problem I'm having is that should those conditions be imposed on this place, we will have a very tough time leasing this place. This has been a restaurant since the 1940s. It's been a beautiful Italian steakhouse owned by a beautiful family for many years. They retired. We brought in these new people from the Red Square. Things weren't good since then, and we now are in a bind. And on one hand, we don't agree with those activities. We don't want to see the alcohol, the crimes. On the other hand, if we lose this, we lose a large stream of our income that comes from this place. The city...
But to be clear, what you're saying right now is that the club known as the Club Red Square does not exist.
Doesn't exist. It's now Ventura Lounge.
What exists today, the Ventura Lounge?
Right. Most of the allegations are that they are here date back to the Ventura Lounge, the Red Square days. As Ventura Lounge, there hasn't been too much problems. My parents live down the block. They're 5-6 blocks away. There are numerous restaurants, nightclubs, coffee shops that serve, some places that serve alcohol, and there are problems. I was sitting one day for a Friday night dinner with my parents, and there's shooting outside just across the alley because somebody shot. Nothing to do with this place. We constantly fight graffiti. My parents' house was broken into 3 times in the past 2 years. That area is not the greatest, and the problem is not being brought on by this club, by Ventura Lounge. So,
thank you, sir. So, would you like to conclude, please? Would you like to finish?
Yes, sir. Our company has just filed for Chapter 11. I'm not sure how this works with the bankruptcy code. We filed Chapter 11 due to the real estate market. We could reject their lease, the current operator's lease, and bring in a new operator, a new restaurant, new concept that wouldn't be. But having all these conditions on our company would devastate us. So I would need your help, please, to work something out. We could reject the lease under the bankruptcy code and bring in a new operator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Nego Mandukian?
Yes, thank you for the members of the committee for taking the time. I am an attorney and I represent the Ventura Lounge. And the Ventura Lounge is the new restaurant bar for the specific location that the city attorney has discussed. Most of these violations that you've heard today were from the previous owner. And as the police officers have indicated to you, they're talking going back 2-3 years of incidents. And the incidents that you've heard is not incidents as a result of the new business owner, Ventura Lounge. Since the taking over of the new business, the nuisance that you've heard today has been significantly abated. After our hearing with the zoning administrator about a year ago, my client has taken significant steps as far as security. They have extra security personnel walking up and down the streets, making sure that none of the customers park there, making sure there's no littering, there's no loitering. Contrary to what was said earlier, there's 57 parking spots designated for my client's facility, not 2, and it's and the landlord can testify to that. And it's a commercial, behind the commercial buildings, there's 57 designated parking spots. The big concern we have that I would ask the committee to reconsider is the time restraints that Mrs. Chang is putting on this business, to the restraint from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Sunday through Thursday, and 10 a.m. to midnight on Friday and Saturday and Sundays. That is basically the functional equivalence of shutting this business down, because most liquor and food for a restaurant on weekends that's sold, it occurs between 11 a.m. and 2 a.m. If you restrict them only 1 hour and shut them down at midnight, it's the functional equivalence of shutting down the business. And that condition will basically not allow my client to sustain his restaurant, and will have to shut down. And he's invested a significant amount of money. He's presently, regarding the dancing and live entertainment permits, since he's a new business, he's in the process of applying for those permits. The recent incidents you've heard about is private parties that my client has allowed, and for private parties, they've asked the police commissioner if dancing and live entertainment is allowed if they're not open to the general public, and they've been informed that it would be okay. But in the meantime, they are applying for the dancing and live entertainment permit, and once they obtain that, they're willing to abide by the law. But the main restriction of cutting down the hours from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 10 a.m. to midnight Friday, Saturday, it's like shutting my client down. And
did you cover all your major points, sir?
The major point that I do want to address, and it's a major concern for this committee, is that all of the complaints that you've heard as far as nuisance for the neighborhood was from the prior owner. The changes that have been made by this owner, there is a significant reduction in the nuisance. There is isolated incidents. Every bar and restaurant has isolated incidents, but the difference between now and back then is huge. And Mr. Bill Larson knows it as well. We've made significant changes, and we ask that this committee and the city council gives us the opportunity to prevent public nuisances from taking place in this neighborhood. And also, the final thing I want to say is there's a hookah lounge across the street. There's a Lima nightclub a block away, and everything is being blamed on my client, and other businesses are not being blamed for this nuisance, and they're causing it as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next set of speakers, the opponents are offered the time they need to express their point of view. They have done so. The next set of speakers are folks who are engaged with this case in one format or another. We will give them 1 minute to speak. So I'd like to call up Claudia Ochoa, Luis Ochoa, and August Store, I believe. Please give us your name and address.
My name is Claudia Ochoa. My address is 5516 Penfield Avenue, Woodland Hills, California. I am here because I fear for the safety of my family. I have little kids. This place is really bad that I'm planning a slumber party for my daughter. I'm thinking of having it over the summer where I would do it during the weekday because I'm fear to do it on a weekend because of all the stuff that goes out of Club Red Square. We have witnessed fights in front of our house, and our kids are afraid. They ask me, Mommy, why do you have to look out the window every time you put me out, to go to sleep on a weekend? And yes, they changed their names, but I have proof here of how the same promoter is coming. These are how they advertise their business when it was Red Square, and now that's Ventura Lounge. I don't know if you guys would like to see
Yes,
it.
please provide it to the city clerk. Thank you, Mrs. Ochoa. Mr. Luis Ochoa. Good afternoon, sir.
My name is Luis Ochoa. Address is 5516 Penfield Avenue, Woodland Hills, California. And I'm also, Claudia's my wife, and we've had the same issues of fear for our family. In addition to what she said, what I want to add is that, we are extremely affected by this because of the fact that just this weekend when the officer said that they had to come and shut down the operation, we went into the website for La Diosa, who, it's all in Spanish, however, but it talks about here how there were 450 people inside the place and 300 waiting outside. There was 900 people waiting to get into this restaurant, which is not, it's a nightclub, and how they're moving because they don't have a license for dancing. So it's affected our lives for the last 5-6 years, and it continues to do so. They did change names, but as I recall, the same gentleman who spoke as the same attorney that was here for the Red Square before. So I believe it's operating under the same. Okay, so if you like, would you like this?
Please provide that to the city clerk. Good afternoon, sir.
Pardon me. I'm August Stoyer. I'm the Planning Land Use Chair of the Woodland Hills Warner Center Neighborhood Council. The Neighborhood Council has worked on this establishment problem for 2 years now. We support the planning department's determination. We find no problem with the hours. We routinely support these type of hours and other establishments along the boulevard. We have no problem getting compliance from other operators. They find these conditions to be proactive and conducive to a good operation of the type of establishments that we want in Woodland Hills. This location right now is a broken window in terms of Ventura Boulevard, and we'd like to see it fixed. In terms of context, this corridor is very shallow, and there's no buffer between the residential areas, and so a nightclub activity is not necessarily appropriate for late hours.
Thank you, sir. We have John Mazone, I believe. Apologies, I mispronounced your name. James B. Anderson and Patton. You're welcome to come on up.
Hello, John Mazur, representing the Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council also. I was asked to having owned a couple of restaurants, I was asked to check out this this club when they first came to us and asked for a extension of their CUP. And everything I've heard the officers say is accurate. I will say, though, that having owned restaurants, you can make a go of it till midnight. As a nightclub, you can't unless you're allowed to go till 2. And I think that's the big distinction here is if somebody wants to run a nightclub, they're not going to be able to run it past 2. And I think, the other people have spoken that running a nightclub in that area is probably not appropriate.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker.
Jim Anderson, Chair of the Public Safety Committee in Woodland Hills. I was a deputy sheriff in Ohio. I'm a Buckeye and proud of it. And maybe it hasn't been mentioned before, but we learned this was called the shell game. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Pat Patton.
My name is Pat Patton. I reside at 4139 Saltillo Street, Woodland Hills, California, 91364. I'm one of the representatives of the Neighborhood Council, the homeowners organization, and resided in the area for over 40 years. For 40 years, that establishment facility operated with never a violation. It was the centerpiece. It had all the family gatherings, it had all the weddings, bar mitzvahs, what have you. Since then, it has deteriorated. The applicants coming before the neighborhood council for request to change to turn a storage area into a patio and such as that. At one point when violations were brought up, the people representing themselves as either the owner, operators as such, denied any responsibility for any actions, and that has been their pattern of action up until this time. They are not responsible. They are not business people that should be in our area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our last speaker is Jonathan Brand, the representative for the council district. And he can give us some guidance as to how the council sees this case, given the information before us.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Reyes, council members. My name is Jonathan Brand. I'm with Councilman Dennis Zine's office. I want to thank you for taking this item out of order so we can get LAPD back out on the streets, and thank you for the community from spending an afternoon here, coming all the way out from Woodland Hills. Councilman Zine requests that the appeal is denied and that the director's determination is sustained. The determination letter from planning places conditions on this restaurant similar to that of a new restaurant applying for a CUP. These conditions will ensure that this place operates as a legitimate restaurant and not as an out-of-control club. The conditions from the zoning administrator, or from the director in this case, is essentially what we do on all new restaurants. They have a license for a restaurant. They choose to operate a club. It's not acceptable. What you've heard from the LAPD and the city attorney and the community is an ongoing nuisance, and we would like for this to end. Thank you very much.
So do you support the recommendation from the planning department?
Yes, we support the determination from the planning
And
department.
so we'll deny the appeal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that'll be the, Councilman, any question? So that'll be the action of this committee to deny the appeal and submit the conditions as stated by the planning department. Okay. Can we hear from our planning director? Go over for your report.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reyes. And I think out of respect for the many people you have here waiting for items, I'm going to be very brief, and I'll save most of my items for our next meeting. I just wanted to let you know we continue to work on the budget and to continue to work on evaluating our work program to match the resources that we expect to have over the next year, and that we have completed our fee study that I think most of you will be interested in to get our case processing closer to cost recovery, and we will be bringing that, and we've already issued the report, and we expect to be at Budget and Finance and here at Plum probably in early June for you to begin to look at a new fee schedule for the planning department, and I think I'll hold off on the rest.
Thank you, Director Gold. Thank you for that sensitivity. In an agenda like this, I would have liked to have been limiting this to just a couple of items, but we did have time-sensitive cases, so we need to move an agenda as it is. And typically, I try to be more strategic in how this agenda flows. That being the case, I'd like to move to item number 12, then we'll jump to 11, and then proceed from there. Roberto, item number 12.
Yes, Councilman. Item 12, what's before you is a supplemental ERR and also a proposed amendment to a development agreement between the city and Cedars-Sinai, and also a zone change, and this is for property located in CD5.
Okay. Sorry.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Kevin Jones. I was a hearing officer involved with preparing the staff report that is before you for the amendments to the existing development agreement for Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. What this development agreement does is that it amends portions of the existing development agreement and revises the existing queue conditions of the existing zone to permit additional development of over 200,000 square feet for a new wing to be developed at the northwest corner of the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The conditions have been included to address the elements that were identified in the new supplemental environmental impact report that has been included with the staff report. With that, I'm going to step aside because I understand it really wasn't very controversial. We had no opposition to the project at either of the public hearings or at the City Planning Commission meeting. It was a very smooth presentation prepared by the applicant and by the planning department staff, and there was no opposition nor request for any other additional conditions at that time. With that, I'll step aside and allow you to take any testimony from the applicant and from the public and remain here for questions.
Well, that's a great suggestion. We will move forward with the public comments, and if there's any questions arising from these comments, we can move forward. If we can hear from the applicant, Larry Coleman.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Larry Coleman. I'm the Vice President, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center for Planning, Design, and Construction. Cedars-Sinai has been around since 1902, and we're the largest research and teaching hospital in the western part of the United States. As many of you know, a lot of hospitals have closed in this area. We've had 32 hospitals close in the last 13 years. We've had 14 emergency departments close in the last 8 years. And with these closures, we've had 3,000 fewer licensed beds in Southern California. In contrast to all of this, we're requesting to add 100 beds to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. With the addition of these 100 beds to Cedars, by the year 2023, Cedars will have 1,082 beds. In 2008, just to give you an example of what we do at Cedars, we had 78,000 emergency room visits at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, making us one of the busiest emergency rooms in California. We also provide one of only 4 Level 1 trauma centers in Southern California. In addition to this, we provide hundreds of millions of dollars of free and discounted care to the community. In 2008, we provided $317 million in community benefits to Southern California. The addition of 100 beds will free up space in our emergency department. This will help us to continue to provide this free and discounted medical care, and will alleviate some of the shortages caused by the closures of hospitals and the lessening of beds in Southern California. So I'd like to request you to help us provide the highest level of care and to approve the project today. So thank you very much.
That's a real tough question, sir. Well, okay, but thank you. I know you have many cards with supporters, but I do have one that says here, concerns with adjacent property owner John Manavian. Would you like to come on up, sir?
Thank you. My name is John Manavian. I'm Vice President of Real Estate for DeCurion and the Robertson Properties Group. We are headquartered in the Robertson Plaza building, which is adjacent to Cedars-Sinai. We're also, our sister companies include Pacific Theaters and ArcLight Cinema. So we've got about 150 to 200 people in the building next door. And as I testified, I did have some opposition, so I'm sorry that staff did not hear that opposition to certain issues. We love Cedars-Sinai, we love the mission, we love what they do for the community. I'm here as a property owner who's concerned about the immediate impact to our adjacent property, and Lisa Trafelti, I appreciate the work she's done in the last 2 weeks to bring the parties together. We're trying to work out an agreement between the properties. Big picture, we're concerned about the driveway entrance on Alden adjacent to ours. We'd like to see that driveway somewhere else, perhaps on George Burns, where the current entrance is on the parking lot. That's something we're working on as an issue. I know that there was a condition, potential condition that arose from that discussion, was at a minimum until that potential feasibility study is done somewhere in the future, that the Cedars Group agree to maintain at least 100 feet of separation between our east property line and what I'm saying specifically the west line of their curb cut, potential curb cut for a future garage. The other concern we have is just from the traffic standpoint of, we were a little confused by the discussion of street closures and the fact that these are private streets. We've learned since then that there is a covenant that restricts that. We do have some issues about what that means because the covenant is a little bit silent on if they do building underneath the road or over the road, and there's any street closure that could in some way impact us as well. So that's an issue that we're working on additionally. So our big issue now is to make sure for the public record that we're a property owner that's concerned. We understand Cedars is willing to work with us. I don't want to be silent to the fact that, staff would say that there's no controversy or there's no issue, but we hope to work things out before the council meeting.
So you have fulfilled your mission in putting your concerns on record.
Correct.
Since they're being marked out,
With the exception of the condition, there's a condition we'd like to make sure gets added.
But you feel comfortable moving forward given the amount of attention that's given to your concerns?
Exactly.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We do have several speakers that have indicated they are supporters, and so I will ask if you're compelled to speak. You don't have to. I don't want to discourage you.
Right.
But you're supporters. So you got Jeff Haber.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, and I'll be the only one speaking.
Well, let me just finish this. Jeff Haber, Chris Ward, Karen Wagner, Robert Alanis, and Barbara Mkhitaryan. And so you're on record as supporters. If you feel compelled to speak on the microphone, but I think we can move forward after we hear our public hearing.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Jeff Haber from Paul Hastings representing Cedars-Sinai. I just want to say thank you very much for having this hearing, and wanted to point out that we have a number of supporters of Cedars-Sinai who've come today, and maybe they could stand for a moment so you can just see that.
Please stand if you like.
So how important this is to the community, and we want to thank the Planning Commission, and particularly Kevin Jones and the staff, for really all their hard work on this matter. I'm obviously available for any questions, but we have been working with the adjacent property owner, as he said, and I'm confident that we'll come to some kind of resolution, and otherwise I'll just be available for questions, and I think we don't need the other speakers unless you really need to hear from them.
Not that I don't want to hear from them, but given that we're so behind in our schedule and still more agenda items, I appreciate you being here and how tough it is to get into City Hall, and thank you for making this trip. The staff has done a great job of doing their homework. I do know this development is occurring within the envelope of space that's been granted as part of the entitlements for Cedars-Sinai. There are issues that are being addressed, so I compliment the council office, Councilman Weiss's office, for their hard work. But I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you, sir. Do you have any questions or issues?
Thank you, sir.
He's saying thank you too. Okay, Councilman Weiss. That being said, that covers all our public hearing. And we can move to approve the item as reported by the planning staff.
Okay, so we're going to move on the zone change and request the city attorney to do the ordinance for the development agreement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the city attorney too, making sure we're all in sync here. Okay, our next item, Roberto, we I guess back to 11?
Yes, Councilman.
Thank you for your trip to City Hall. Item number 11, please.
It's an appeal by Diane Edwardson, Cindy Ortiz, and Cheryl Parisi, and they're appealing the action of the East LA APC as it relates to a zone change in a tract map, and this is for a 15-lot single-family subdivision in CD 13.
Sorry about that.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, good afternoon, committee.
We've been here before, haven't we?
My name is Latif Shalobo, Department of City Planning, Division of Land. This is follow-up of the motion by the City Council on February 25, 2009, instructing the planning staff to review and analyze the mitigated negative declaration EMV 2005-9337-MND for the purpose of clarifying whether or not the proposed 16 small lot subdivision located at 2400 Alexandro Street will result in impact in the areas of aesthetic, biological resources, geology, and soils, and for the clarification of the mitigation measures proposed for any such impact. The motion also instructed the planning staff to report back to the Plum Committee with the requested information and with the recommendation of whether the mitigated negative declaration as revised is sufficient or whether an environmental impact report is required. Based on the council motion, a biological assessment has been prepared, and based upon this assessment, staff is recommending that the East Los Angeles Area Planning Commission approval be amended to incorporate 2 additional mitigation measures which are intended to mitigate the potential impact to the burrowing owl habitat which were found on the site. Staff also find that the MND as revised is adequate to mitigate all the impact identified to a less than significant level, including aesthetic and geology and soil reports as instructed by the council to identify.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the staff, for the staff? Councilman Weiss? I guess not. Any questions? All right. Okay, we have several speaker cards on this item. We do have 2 council representatives like to speak first or last? First? Come on up then. Give us your name.
Good afternoon, council members. Noelle Hyun, Planning Deputy for Councilmember Garcetti. I'm here today with our District Director, Mitch O'Farrell, as well, who's been involved with this project. We're here today, as you know, this item was before the committee in February. At that time, the City Attorney's Office identified a problem with some of the condition, or one of the conditions that we were imposing as it relates to how we implement the requirements of CEQA. Since then, we advised the applicant to go back, engage a biological consultant who would survey the parcel for any biological resources that exist there. The consultant came back with a report recommending some additional conditions of approval, which were incorporated into a mitigated negative declaration. That revised MND was recirculated and had a publication period, and so that's the reason we're here before you today. Mitch O'Farrell is going to talk a little bit about our office's involvement through the process. This has been a multi-year effort, but where we are today is that we're happy with the staff recommendation, the conditions of approval, which we'd worked very hard to get to, have been incorporated. And so, Mitch, do you want to come up?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Mitch O'Farrell, District Director, Constituent Services for City Council President Eric Garcetti. And I'm just going to read something that I prepared about this case. Over the last several years, this office has worked with the community and the applicant to reach a consensus for approval of the development at 2400 Alessandro, also known affectionately as the former semi-tropical spiritualist tract. To neighboring residents and beyond, this is an immensely important location. Although opinions on this proposal vary widely, most would love to see the entire site preserved as open space as long as it was managed and maintained properly. However, no one has yet been successful at acquiring the site for that purpose. Conversely, the applicant has agreed to conditions we specifically outlined on January 29th of 2008, and additional requirements have been imposed as a result of the biological study that was conducted. I will underscore here for the record that perhaps the most important aspect of this proposal is in relation to the intrinsic value of the existing conditions there. Mature coastal live oaks, black walnut trees, a variety of wildlife, maintaining a wildlife corridor, and topography that this community has been accustomed to since construction of the 2 and the 5 freeways that crisscross nearby. The developer has given us assurances that great care will be given in relation to grading and the most valuable established trees. We are pleased that they agreed to designate more than 1/3 of the site as open space, and it will be deed restricted to reflect that. We are also glad the Planning Department is requesting that a detailed landscaping plan specific to open space, the parcel number 16, is presented to planning for approval in advance of any permit. I would also like to reiterate here, for the record, that this office will also be directly involved with that process and all other aspects of this proposal, should it become a reality. Lastly, we are appreciative of the countless hours of volunteer time by the appellants and others who over the years have exhibited a deeply vested interest to what happens there. Likewise, we are appreciative of the applicant for making revisions from the original proposal over the years to make this a development that, once completed, will potentially add to, not subtract from, the quality and environment of the surrounding area. We will demand and are confident that, should the project get built, all aspects of the development will be approached with great sensitivity and full consideration of the sentiments vividly expressed by many throughout this entire process.
Thanks, Mr. O'Farrell. Our next speaker, Lisa K. Nixon, James Miller, and Diane Overton. Yeah, okay.
Issa K. Mixon, 1028 and a half Laguna Avenue, Los Angeles, 90026. When Gail Goldberg came to Los Angeles for the planning department, in her comments at neighborhood meetings, she spoke about the fact that a project should be in relationship to the community around it, not just an isolated project. In spite of all the alterations, this project still does not integrate into the community on that street in particular and the general Echo Park area. It is isolated. The very nature of its construction makes it appear as a gated community with or without a specific gate. The mentality is gated. And in terms of income, I know there's this thrust for affordable housing. How many units will be affordable housing? I think in general this project still violates the goals and vision that's been given to us. And it's not just affectionately called the spiritualist tract. That was its name.
Thank you. Diane
Diane Edwardson, 2630 Corralitos Drive, Los Angeles 90039. I am one of the appellants in the case. While a new MND an updated MND was reissued, very little changed, and I do take issue with the biological resources report, and someone from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy will elaborate on the wildlife corridor. However, the environmental effects of grading still have not been adequately addressed. Yes, we want the grading to be safe, and that is the nature of the grading memos that were attached to the MND. However, taking out an entire hillside was never a part of what we were pitched prior to the initial public hearing on this, and thus the nature of all this distress. When you start removing 3 acres of watershed from a hillside neighborhood that gets more than average rainfall, it's not only changing water quality issues, you're taking out your trees, mature trees next to the freeway, and most importantly, were never able to evaluate that adequately. The upper slope adjacent to Peru, Majeska, and El Moran were never evaluated for their retention methods or drainage, and this neighborhood has consistently said, we don't want big retaining walls, and the danger in this lot is, like so many failed developments in our neighborhood, like the Menlo property.
Ms. Anderson, I'm going to ask you to pause for a second. Can hold their time. Let's go back a minute. I'd like to have Councilman Weiss at the table. This is an appeal. I want to make sure that we are here listening to you. So I want to make sure we have the committee at the table. So out of courtesy to you and the work you've done, just bear with us, and I ask for a little bit more patience. Okay, can we go back to a minute for her?
Okay.
So we'll go back to a minute. He was here for the first minute. We lost him, so he's back, and we're giving you back your minute.
The legacy of failed development in our corridor of the 2 and the 5 freeways is extreme. This lot itself was approved for 30-some units in the 80s. It never got built. The Menlo property, we have a giant retaining wall that we had a site that had no no safety measures. The wall was falling down, and we had to live with that for more than a dozen years. And I totally foresee this happening with this lot once they start digging into it. No trees should be removed prior to the issuance of grading permits. That's about all I can add. That hasn't been said before in writing with photographs illustrating my points.
Thank you, Ms. Everson. Thank you very much. Paul Edelman and Untitled Chapter.
Honorable members, Paul Edelman, Deputy Director of Natural Resources and Planning for the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. What the Conservancy wants is the public to get something out of this approval, and we feel at this point the public gets zero. What's at stake in addition since our last submittals on this is a letter we submitted into the record, and I'm putting two figures in front of you, is that essentially this project would sacrifice the wildlife corridor between Griffith Park and Elysian Park. Shame on the Conservancy for not realizing that until this stage of the process, but we cover a lot of areas, and it finally became clear that this is the corridor going along the red line. And there's documentation of gray fox populations in Elysian Park. There's documentation of gray fox and bobcat populations, albeit small, in the red car just north of Alessandro. We've argued here's why the public gets nothing. We've said in our letter before that the conditions as written, they don't guarantee that a trail will come out of this project or that there will be public open space.
I'm sorry, Barbara, can you set the clock, please? The clock. Thank you.
It's the opposite. They guarantee that there will not be a public trail and there will not be public open space. There's really an example of where you have a private open space lot open to the public. There have been a lot of excuses, financial and deferral, and the staff hasn't corrected this, and I was hoping that this committee and the staff would correct it. And I think the concern is why not? I think there's an issue here where the trail and the public open space aren't to come about. The key thing is that the MND completely missed the boat about this wildlife corridor. It just essentially took the position that because this is in a different watershed than a portion of Elysian Park, there can't be a wildlife corridor. The evidence is incontrovertible about this connection. The MND said nothing about it, and I really don't want to see this go to council tomorrow and be the death knell of this corridor to Elysian Park. From an environmental justice standpoint, that having that biodiversity in our southernmost wild park near downtown is an important thing. I think we can do two things here today. We can continue, which I don't think the developer wants to do or anybody wants to do, but I do believe these problems can be solved if the applicant lops off his two easternmost lots and incorporates the language put in by the Conservancy's letter about securing public access to the open space and a trail, making sure that a trail is built no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have Chopra and Cindy Ortiz.
Hi. My name is Guadalupe Chopra, and my address is 2292 Silver Ridge Avenue. Thank you for hearing my support
Good afternoon.
of the appellant. The City Planning Commission is developing recommendations for construction guidelines on new residential construction within 500 feet of freeways. They include mitigation measures such as highly rated air filtration systems and non-operable windows on the sides of freeways. One of the least controversial recommendations from Planning Director Goldberg's January 26, 2009 letter is a requirement for landscaping with a, quote, dense mixture of shrubs and trees to maximize passive filtration of particulate air contaminants. From this response to the City Planning Commission from the Planning Director, it's clear that the city's response does not go far enough for both native and significant tree replacement for lots near freeways.
Thank you, Ms. Chopra. Cindy Ortiz. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank
My
you.
name is Cindy Ortiz, and I'm a 21 and a half year resident of the semi-tropic spiritualist tract. This process started, this is its 5th year. And the opponents to this development have stuck with it. And on April 20th, 2009, I presented 3 letters to the city clerk's office. One from Lewis McLean, one from Carson Listico, and myself. Carson and Lou have debilitating heart conditions, and I have a weakened immune system. I can't begin to tell you, the residents on the Hill. You have an individual who is 92 years old to an infant that is about 8 months old. You have every age group in between represented. In the almost 5 years that we have been with this development, never once were we told the amount of grading. With all the CD13 facilitated meetings, with all the meetings with the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council, that one question was continuously asked. And I will tell you that there are 2 occasions when the applicant, Henry Nunez, never answered a single question. All we heard was maybe, maybe not, I don't know, who knows. Not good enough. And I will also tell you that I am very concerned about grading. I am also very concerned of the health risks that could be generated from this. I am forced to consider protecting what I love the most, and that's my husband, Carson Listico. I do wish that all this could be taken in consideration, and also just a few things right here.
That's what Chase, I really need for you to conclude.
Okay, real quickly.
Please finish.
This is for the committee. This happens to do with low birth weight, built near freeways, and all the studies are
Thank
here,
you, Ms.
USC,
Ortiz.
etc.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, the next set of speakers will be Henry Nunez, Michael C. Wernick, and James Nunez.
Good afternoon. Henry Nunez. I'm the applicant and the owner. Everything here, every item that has been brought up has been put on, vocalized, it's been written. It's been the same issues that we've dealt with all along. It's been 2 years, 7 months since this project was actually submitted. We've gotten almost unanimous support through all the East LA Planning Commission and the Neighborhood Council. There have been various conditions that have been recommended, which we have incorporated. The design, the site is 3 acres. We have over 1 acre of open space. It's actually a perfect development that fits the general plan. It's cluster housing, open space. There's a lot of land that we're keeping for public open space, for an animal corridor, wildlife corridor. And I'd like to request, as I did at the last meeting, condition number 20E be amended to 6 weeks. 20E states grading to be limited to 3 weeks. On our soils report dated October 16th, 2006 is when the upper slope was identified as uncertified fill. So there's some uncertified fill from previous cuts, I think, from the freeway. And the soils engineer wants that addressed. It's a section about 100 feet long and varies between 2 foot and 7 feet deep. Now, there's 2 ways you can address that. You can cut and export the dirt, or you can recompact it on site.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Nunez. This is 20E you're referring to?
Yes.
Now, did you have this discussion with the staff?
Yes.
And the council district, who has been working on this case for many years?
Mm-hmm.
Is the council district amenable to these changes? Is Mr. Shalibo, 20E, is this something that you have reviewed, and can you give me your opinion on that? Can you come to the microphone?
Latif Shalibo, City Planning. The applicant did request that the amount of time given based on the haul route application he submitted to us, where we limited the number of days to 3 weeks for the grading in case they are going to export. He was saying that he was unable to conclude whether 3 weeks will be enough for him, and he's going to be requesting from the committee to see if he can get 3 additional more weeks.
An extension, you're saying?
When? What was the question?
Okay, I want to be clear. What are they asking for, and what is your position on the request?
Well, the position I took was that 6 week will be okay as long as the applicant is not going to.
So you support his request?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, that's the question. Okay. Want to finish, Mr. Nunez?
That's the only change I respectfully request.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Next speaker, we have Michael C. Warnick and James Nunez.
Yes, thank you. My name is Michael C. Warnicki. I'm representing Herb Pacheco, who owns property at 2006 El Moran Street. What I'm requesting help from the City Council with the following matter. The street El Moran, as far as the city records is concerned, is an open street. I was informed by the city streets that a B permit was required to improve El Moran. My question is why the city or the City Council office did not ask Henry Nunes Real Estate Incorporated, Fishers Associates for a B permit for the improvement of El Moran Street, since they are redeveloping the land adjacent to the street that the Bureau of City Streets deems must be improved. Now, a B permit is usually, are you familiar with a B permit, Ed?
Do you want to ask the staff on the side?
I could do that, yes.
What, you just want to have that question answered, sir?
Yes, I would. I would like to have that question
Okay, can we offer him a reason? Your question is, why isn't the B permit improving?
Why is Henry Nunes not asked to pull the B permit, which he's developing land adjacent to a street that the city is requesting to be improved, which is an open street?
If I understand, first of all, Michael Young, Deputy Advisory Agency with the Planning Department. If I understand the question, he wondered about the building permit process in regards to improving the streets.
No. I'm wondering why Henry Nunes was not asked to pull the B permit.
Well, that's one of the conditions.
Sir, could you have that on the side so we can continue on this?
Yes.
Mr. Young, can you answer his question?
Yes.
On the side there, because it's not a question for the committee. We should make sure that his question is being answered.
I can do that.
Oh, thank you, sir. Okay, does that cover all the speaker cards? I believe it does. It's very clear to me that there has been a lot of work done in this case. And it did come before this committee before. We did have some questions done, and I want to thank the council office for their hard work and due diligence in trying to get to this place. I think the best case scenario could have been, and if the resources were there, that we could actually have an entity to essentially keep an open space, because those of us who do live in the Northeast understand how park poor we are, and that has been very clear, I believe, and I feel confident in saying that Councilman Garcetti has been one of the leaders in trying to develop pocket parks and open space and every nook and cranny that he's been able to find in his district. And to reach this compromise, I know for some is not the best case scenario, but given that we need to respect property rights and given the level of work that's been demonstrated in this committee, we need to move forward on this matter. So Councilman Rice, like to adopt the MMD and deny the appeal at this time.
How about the modified conditions and requests for the grading, the hauling?
We can include the modified conditions as stated by the staff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that a second there? There's a nod for a yes. So that'll be action this committee. Okay, Roberta, next item.
Before we go on, Councilman, that's assuming that you're going to adopt the zone change also.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item, Roberto.
Councilman, that would be item number 14, which is the CPC and zoning administrator proposed zone ordinance.
The rather small item we have right in front of us?
Very small.
Okay. Now, I do know that we have some statements from the neighborhood council. Is that right, Barbara? So,
Yes, I believe we have one new, we have prior statements from the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council, and the Studio City Neighborhood Council wants to have clarified the position that they are in support of the moratorium of the City Planning Commission, but are opposed to the current ordinance as it is drafted. And we have one new community impact statement for the West Side Neighborhood Council, and it's on your desk.
okay. I do know that Councilman Ortiz wanted to be here for this item. He's being pulled in two places. He's over at Budget and Finance. So can we pause for a second? Before we get started, I want to give him the opportunity to be here. He did want to be at this committee item. Just pause for a few minutes and make sure that he gets here, because again, I want to proceed with him present to make sure we cover all our legal bases.
Oh, they're not the end yet. We still haven't heard 14 yet. Yes. No, it's not my fault.
Oh, no, I don't. I just thought he was waiting for him. Comment on other items.
We only have one card. I doubt that he will, yeah. Are you on this item, or is it something totally not related?
Unrelated. That's
Yeah, well, I think he planned to go use the bathroom. I mentioned totally. Okay. I know it.
You didn't mention
I'm sorry?
You did not mention.
Yes, I did. I did you first. It's on the tape. Yeah, I did. I said you first. No, I can't do it again. I did. Listen to this tape. I said you guys first. And I was told that this was already submitted. There's just some differences, so I'm going to submit it to the record again. Okay. But I did mention you. I said you first. I said the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council first. It's okay.
Did you do 14 yet?
No, we're doing it.
Right now? Oh, okay. Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I did.
Pardon me? Okay, great. And I want you to know, I just spoke with them and ran over here because it's been in every single hearing. I put it in.
All right, folks. I believe all the committee members with us. Again, I thank you for your patience, extremely long council today. We had items that had to meet legal deadlines. In the ideal world, we probably would have had 2 items today, but that's not the case. So, what time is it now?
4:39.
4:39, okay. 3 hours before the Laker game, so we're pretty good.
Right.
Good pace, Alan.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Right. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Alan Bell, Planning Department staff. On April 21st, Plum considered a City Planning Commission recommendation report and draft ordinance to comprehensively revise the sign regulations. Plum took public testimony on the matter and instructed staff to further research 20 issues. We prepared a written report which was released on May the 6th. Of those 20 issues, staff recommends ordinance changes in 11 areas of the ordinance, but concludes that no change is necessary in 8 other areas. The 20th and last topic concerns pending applications for sign districts and other special signage ordinances.
Mr. Bell, speak a little bit closer to the microphone, as comfortable as you can get.
And with the city attorney's help, staff has drafted the appropriate transition language should this committee decide to make sure that these applications for these existing sign districts are processed under the existing ordinance rather than the proposed ordinance. Finally, as part of today's presentation, I will be reviewing the application fees for under the sign ordinance and then also referencing certain technical and clarifying languages that staff is recommending also be incorporated into the draft ordinance based upon a special review of this ordinance by the Department of Building and Safety, and these are primarily technical and clarifying changes. First, let me review for the committee, because we did get specific instruction on April the 21st. Those 11 action items where the staff is recommending specific changes be incorporated into the draft ordinance. The first 2 issues on this action item list revolve around sign districts. And Council Member Wise asked us to respond to whether or not Westwood Village and Ventura Boulevard regional commercial areas should be designated as ineligible for sign district designation because existing specific plans in those areas specifically prohibit off-site signs. And while our recommendation is that we not decide that certain regional centers or certain regional commercial areas not be included within the ordinance, that we can address this issue more precisely and accurately by including within the ordinance language that says that if the area to be regulated by both a specific plan and a sign district are the same areas, that the sign district cannot supersede or conflict with those specific plan regulations. Since those specific plans specifically prohibit off-site signs, any following sign district could not supersede that particular provision, and we feel that that would take care of that particular problem. Council Member Weiss also, as a second issue with respect to sign districts, asked us to research the feasibility of including language that said that sign districts would not be allowed on or near ecological reserves, and there was one particular regional center area, the Bayona wetlands, that would be impacted by this current provision. And so staff is recommending that we include language that says that a sign district could not be established within 500 feet of an established ecological reserve. The next set of issues has to do with enforcement and penalties. Again, Council Member Wise asked us to clarify that all of the responsible parties, which under the ordinance are two, the sign companies, those that erect the signs, and then the property owner, those are the two responsible parties. If they are each individually responsible for paying any civil penalties that may be imposed if there is a violation of the sign regulations, and we can certainly add and have provided language to clarify that particular distinction, that both parties are separately and individually responsible for paying those civil penalties. Councilmember Wise also asked that an intent language be included within the ordinance, that supergraphics, which under the proposed regulations, the definition is to be taken out of the ordinance and they are to be regulated as wall signs. Supergraphics, by definition, are merely jumbo wall signs, and we can include that intent language without harming the purpose of the ordinance. Two issues relates to wall signs and then also temporary signs, and this was also from Councilmember Wise. One was whether or not we should establish a square footage maximum for each individual wall sign, and then also for temporary signs. Let me address the issue of temporary signs first. The issue here is that temporary signs under the current sign code can allow either an on-site message, a non-commercial message, or an off-site message. And if we don't impose a size restriction on individual temporary signs, we could have, in effect, temporary supergraphic signs. So to close this particular loophole, staff is recommending that we limit the size of any temporary sign that is going to display an off-site message to 250 square feet. That is consistent with existing provisions of the sign ordinance for temporary signs on temporary construction walls, which limit those, which are all off-site messages, to no more than 250 square feet. It's appropriate, and it makes the ordinance consistent on that particular set of regulations. With respect to limiting the size of individual wall signs, we don't recommend that we do that. There was a lot of discussion about limiting the size of individual wall signs. It is more appropriately controlled by the total signage that is allowed on a particular site. If we imposed limits on individual wall signs, it could mean that it would not be effective because each wall sign could be given an individual size limit, but they could all be lined up in a row, and you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was one big wall sign or one or three separate small wall signs. So from a technical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to include that recommendation within the ordinance. Item number 6 was whether temporary signs should be limited as far as their ability to display off-site messages. I already covered that, but that was a separate punch list item from Councilmember Wise, and again, we recommend that it be limited in size to 250 square feet. Another technical issue also from Councilmember Wise was whether temporary signs should be specified within the ordinance that they cannot cover windows, and we're recommending that we add clarifying language that all temporary signs that are going to be visible from a window, that they only be allowed to be placed on the interior and not the exterior of a window, and that's consistent with the recommendations that we're proposing with respect to wall signs themselves. So we can add that particular language as recommended by Councilmember Wise, and that clarifies an existing provision of the sign ordinance. The 8th action item had to do with identification placards on temporary signs that are placed on temporary construction walls. We can include this particular revision as recommended, as proposed by Councilmember Wise. The 9th issue from Councilmember Reyes had to do with the comprehensive sign program. Again, just to refresh, the comprehensive sign program is a discretionary review relief mechanism from the citywide baseline regulations, and as proposed by the City Planning Commission, it is restricted to only the commercial and industrial zones, only properties that have a minimum of 5 acres, and only those that have at least 100,000 square feet of residential floor area. For those 3 items, we are recommending no change to the minimum 5-acre requirement, and no change to the minimum 100,000 square feet of non-residential floor area requirement. We are recommending, however, that we take out the provisions that say that these are limited only to the C and M zones, but they be allowed in any zone. And the reason why is because there are many institutions, colleges that have non-residential floor area, but they have been established by a conditional use permit within those residential zones. So as long as we retain the provision that it be restricted to sites that have non-residential floor area, we think it will broaden the application of this. It serves the original intent, and so we think that this is advisable. Number 10, this was both from Council Members Weiss and Reyes, had to do with the distinction between exterior and interior signs. And this particular issue is critical because the sign ordinance only regulates signs that are exterior. Interior signs are not regulated by the sign ordinance, meaning if it's interior, it can be a digital sign. If it's interior, it can be a billboard. Essentially, there's absolutely no regulation if it is considered to be an interior sign. So we have to be very careful about defining the difference between the two, because of how you define it, you carve out a very large exception for those types of signs if they are classified as interior. So we worked very closely with the Department of Building and Safety to come up with a very bright line recommendation that would not trigger the law of unintended consequences. And our recommendation is that if a sign faces an interior court and is bounded on all sides by one or more buildings, and that if no sign exceeds the height of one of those building walls, that it, for the purposes of enforcing the ordinance, it would be considered an interior sign, and so therefore would not be subject to the sign code regulations. Basically, those signs would be unregulated, and they could be of any sign type and not subject to any sign regulation. We're very confident with this particular provision that they would not be visible in any way, shape, or form from the public right-of-way. We would not have to rely upon sight lines or making determinations of what's visible or not visible, whether there is a tree in the public right-of-way that determines whether it's visible or invisible. It's very concrete, and Building and Safety has agreed that this is appropriate language to include within the ordinance. Finally, Councilmember Wise also suggested that language be added clarifying that the full replacement of any sign that is a legal non-conforming sign, that the replacement would have to conform to the building code and to the zoning code. So that is currently within the codes. We are simply adding language that merely clarifies that an existing particular provision. So that wraps up those 11 recommended revisions to the ordinance approved by the Planning Commission, where we are recommending specific changes. And then there are 8 items, which I'll go very briefly through, where we don't believe any change is necessary. If you want me to go into more detail about those, I can. But in the interest of saving time, perhaps I can list those particular items, and if you want me to explain more the rationale, I can do that.
If you just go over the item without a detail, so it's on the record what it is you're referring to, and that the public can hear what those items consist of.
This is action item number 12 from the original punch list, and it had to do with the sign impact areas of sign districts from Councilmember Wise and Reyes, and we believe that the existing provisions are appropriate. There's no need to revise the definition of a sign impact area, which is the area surrounding a sign district where signs must be taken down. The suggestion for community plans and council districts did not have merit, and the language is broad enough to be able to cover enough geography to accomplish the purpose intended by the Planning Commission. Item number 13 had to do with the current Century City Regional Center area. There was a suggestion that it should not be listed within the areas listed as eligible for sign district designation because it abuts a single-family zone. We don't feel it's necessary because the existing language addresses that particular issue. Item number 14 had to do with whether or not we should include language enabling the city to hold advertisers as a third responsible party for complying with the sign regulations. We did extensive research. We could find that no city had that particular language, and the two cities that did attempt to try to recoup penalties from advertisers did so without success, but they did so at great legal cost, and the most important provision has been with the City of New York, administrative civil penalties. We think that has the most merit and is the best enforcement deterrent. Item number 15 was from Councilmember Wise to clarify whether existing signs erected without permits must conform with the new sign ordinance that is embedded into the zoning code, so no change is necessary. Wall signs and temporary signs, there was a suggestion as to whether or not the current 90-day limitation on temporary signs should be applied to just an individual sign or to all the temporary signs on a particular property. That would cause a great deal of grief for multi-tenant shopping centers, because it would mean that all the signs would have to be no more than 90 days. And if one particular tenant decided to use up that 90-day allotment during the course of a year, no other tenant would have the opportunity to have a temporary sign. So that would not be fair for all the tenants in shopping centers. Item number 17 was from Councilmember Wise, a suggestion to expressly ban the conversion of off-site digital signs. The language in the ordinance is clear that the conversion of off-site digital signs is prohibited by this ordinance, so no change is necessary. Item number 18 from Councilmember Wise to regulate existing digital signs that are permitted under the settlement agreements in terms of their brightness, their hours of duration, the length of the message stay. The City Planning Commission directed the Planning Department to address this issue as part of the one-year follow-up. It's a complicated issue, and it is deserving of attention and should be addressed as part of the one-year follow-up and should not be addressed, we feel, as part of these revisions to the sign ordinance. Number 19, the final issue from Councilmember Reyes, had to do with working with the Department of Transportation to come up with the definition as to what a hazard to traffic is. There are provisions within the sign code that says if there is a perceived hazard to traffic that it be referred to the Department of Transportation for an evaluation. Again, we're recommending no change at this time, but that it be addressed as part of a follow-up task force and follow-up one-year review on the sign ordinance. So those are the 8 action items where we are recommending no change at this time, or we feel that no change is necessary. The 20th item had to do with sign districts, specifically those sign district applications that we have already received, and they are currently in process, and there are 10 of those. Some of those are with respect to specific sign district applications. Some are special signage regulations for arenas, the Coliseum, and there's also one where a draft environmental impact report identifies that. If the committee wishes to, in a sense, have all of these existing applications processed under the old rules, the existing rules, rather than the new rules, we have drafted language to accomplish that purpose. And that particular language, which we drafted in consultation with the City Attorney's Office, is included within the staff report, so we have proper legal language to accomplish what we would call that particular grandfathering. The other issue had to do, that I want to just touch on very briefly, had to do with the application filing fees. We did include within our staff report of May the 6th recommended filing fees. Given the urgency of this matter, we don't believe that if this item leaves the committee today and is heard by the City Council, that there will be enough time to meet the 10-day publication requirement. So we are recommending today that the ordinance not include the administrative fees to make sure that it not be held up, but they would not inadvertently hold up approval of this ordinance, but rather that these fees would be included in the comprehensive citywide fee ordinance, which will be presented to the City Council very shortly, within a matter of weeks. Finally, the recommendations from the Department of Building and Safety, based upon their technical review, there are 17 action items that we worked on with the Department of Building Safety. Again, let me touch on very briefly what those are, just for the record, and they are further explicated within the staff report. These are all technical clarifying changes, but they address the definition of wall and window signs, sign regulations for the parking zones, sign regulations for lots that have 2 or more street frontages, how to measure height, the maximum sign area for information signs, monument signs, projecting signs, and illuminated architectural canopy signs, the maximum number of signs allowed on a street frontage, the wall sign coverage, the sign area of high-rise identification signs, the height of pole signs, the maximum size of temporary signs allowed in the agricultural and residential zones, the application of the sign modification procedure to an approved comprehensive sign program, to specifically say that if you have a sign program, you cannot also, in a sense, double dip and apply also for sign modification. It has to be one or the other. And then language clarifying the appeal routes for appeals of building and safety's orders to comply. Those are the 17 items that resulted from a conference that we held with the Department of Building and Safety on April the 27th. And then also just yesterday, there was further discussion with the Department of Building and Safety with respect to the definition, critical definition of an on-site sign. And we are recommending that particular language be incorporated into the ordinance. So let me read this particular definition into the record, which we recommend be incorporated into the ordinance with building safety's blessing. An off-site sign, which is a sign that displays any message directing attention to a business, product, service, profession, commodity, activity, event, person, or institution, which is not conducted, sold, manufactured, produced, offered, or occurs on the premises where the sign is located, or any ideological, political, or other non-commercial message. The last bit of business that I would like to read into the record and explain has to do with it also has to do with the issue of transition rules between this, the proposed ordinance and the existing ordinance. We have language that says that those particular projects that were entitled through a conditional use permit or entitled through a variance, they would be grandfathered in. And we have many of those sites within the city. The way the ordinance was written, those particular sites would not be able to file for plan approvals to make slight modifications or deviations to their already approved signage plans, and that would cause quite a bit of a hardship for those existing sites. So we are recommending that the relief provisions of the sign ordinance also be amended, and through an exception to that provision. And we worked very closely with the building and safety and also with the city attorney's office on this relief language. So let me read this into the record. Approval of plans for on-site signs may be submitted and approved pursuant to the procedures set forth in sections 1224M and 1227U of this code, provided that the conditional use permit or variance was granted before the effective date of this ordinance, and specifically permitted on-site signs or otherwise provided relief from the sign regulations. Similarly, on-site applications may be submitted and approved where other discretionary approvals listed in section 1605B2 of this code, which is the site plan review provisions, were granted before the effective date of this ordinance, are still valid, and specifically permitted on-site signs or otherwise provided relief from the sign regulations. So incorporation of this particular exception will go a long way towards enhancing the fairness and making the ordinance work as intended. So that summarizes staff's recommendation on our report back on the 20 action items that we received from the planning committee on April 21st.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. I know there's been many hours dedicated to get to this threshold. So I thank you for your hard work, especially throughout the holidays, and we continue to work on this. So let's hope we reach another threshold of progress in this endeavor. I am waiting for Andrew Edelman, the Director of Building and Safety. When he does come, I will ask him to come to the microphone. One of the major factors in the quality of life of the city is about enforcement, how we enforce our laws. And so, given the instructions and given the clarity in the definition, so that the implementation of this ordinance can be actually performed is key. So I want to make sure that building and safety has the opportunity to speak. So that being said, we will wait for him to get here. I know his staff is here already, but I need to hear from him directly on the record in terms of his position and his response to the work thus far when it comes to implementing and enforcing. So I know he's on his way in. That being said, if there's no questions of Mr. Bell, we can go to the public comment period. We'd like to dedicate 1 minute per speaker since we've gone through this issue on several occasions. We're fairly thorough the last round. Once we finish that, we can bring the staff back for questions that my colleagues might have. So that being said, there is one individual who does represent the council office of another district who is here. I'd like to acknowledge her and give her the courtesy of her presence. Renee Weitzer, Councilman Tom LaBonge, is the only card I have here from a council office, so I want to make sure we recognize you. Ms. Weitzer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Renee Weitzer for Councilman Tom LaBonge. Councilman LaBonge has reviewed the proposed sign ordinance and has some real concerns. After a great deal of thought and discussion in our office, we agree with our two planning commissioners, Commissioner Wu and Commissioner Kizios, when they voted no on this ordinance, specifically because of the sign districts. Councilman LaBonge cannot support the grandfathering of pending sign districts. A perfect example would be in our district, the MTA Universal Project, which has applied for a sign district, however, has not even finished the environmental review. There's only a draft EIR out. There's no final. There's no hearings been held on the project. There is no project approved. In fact, we have an issue with the project as proposed, and I don't believe that those pending districts should be grandfathered in. However, the districts, the sign districts that had gone through full city council approval and had their projects approved, they should be allowed to be grandfathered in. That is a major position for us. Further, I'd like to say that Councilman Tom LaBonge will be introducing a motion to restrict new sign districts in the city except for the downtown area only. We strongly believe that allowing sign districts all over the city is nothing more than a vehicle for proliferation of signs. The councilman appreciates and admires good architecture and has trouble in seeing beautiful buildings covered with advertising all over the city. So we are going to present a motion in opposing sign districts all over the city except for the downtown area. Now, in certain instances, such as some of the movie studios, such as Paramount or Universal, we don't really have a problem with the interior of the signs. But we do not believe that they should be grandfathered in when a project has not been approved. Thank you very much.
Just for the sake of clarity, I want to make sure it's on the record that that action of grandfathering does not mean that they will be entitled. What it means is that they will continue in the process, so they have not finished the EIR, or if they are still going through the process of fulfilling the stages of the EIR, then there will be an ultimate decision. So I want to make sure we're not misleading, and the way you phrased it, I feel misleads what the grandfathering is trying to accomplish. We are not saying that every sign district will be approved. What we're saying is that we want to maintain the actual process that they have been engaged in and let it fulfill its completion and let the stakeholders, the most respective districts, participate in the decision, and they could be either voted in, it could be voted out, they could be implemented or not implemented. So I want to make sure that's clear.
I understand what you're saying, Councilman, but right here on this paper, it indicates grandfathering of pending sign districts. And even though they do have a process, we don't believe in sign districts, and that is one reason why the councilman is bringing in the motion. However, we do have a concern with the language that is in here because it does state grandfathering of pending sign districts. So that's an issue that we do have. Pardon me? Well, but that's what people see, and that's what people believe, and that's, you know.
Let's, sir.
Vince Bertoni, Deputy Director, and it is a term that we used in planning to describe it, and maybe we could have used a better word, to be honest with you. What we meant to say is that those projects would create a pipeline, and these were this list of projects that you have on there, that they would be allowed to go through the approval process under the rules that were in place at the time they submitted their application. So all of those rules into whether they could be established, the findings, conditions of approval, what the process would be, whatever was in place at the time their application was complete, all that meant was they could go through those rules, not the new rules adopted under this ordinance. So that means that they would go through the process, all the public hearings, the findings, and at the end of the day, they may be approved or they may be denied ultimately by the City Council. We probably could have used a term that was a little clearer. I think either pipeline or transition would probably be a clearer term than grandfathering, because the way the ordinance is proposed and written, it would not give them any other rights. It wouldn't give them any approvals as part of this.
You know, it's all how you look at it. If this ordinance does go through, then why should those pending sign districts that have applied be subject to be able to go through? Once the ordinance is approved, then we have new rules, and anyhow, we're opposed to sign districts, bottom line.
That's fine, and that is a prerogative.
Except for downtown.
That's fine.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question about the second issue that Mr. Labange's office raised, and that is that if we don't allow sign districts, or we prohibit an exception and don't allow sign districts, it's a worthy question to explore, because what's to say that we don't have a proliferation of sign districts such that, you know, the exception is swallowing the rule, and it's a way to get out of these new rules. What guarantees do we have in this sign ordinance that will not be the case? I assume there are certain findings that must be established when we establish a sign district. Are they sufficient such that we don't have this as a loophole in the new sign district, the sign ordinance?
Well, one of the main, Allen Bell Planning Department staff, one of the main provisions attached to the new sign district regulations that we don't have right now is mandatory sign reduction. So that if a sign district is going to be established, and that sign district allows a new billboard, it allows a new digital sign, that it be offset by a more than one-to-one reduction in other existing billboards within the sign impact area that would surround the new sign district. So what this means is that you could use the sign district tool to essentially reduce on a citywide basis the total number of billboards existing throughout the whole city. You would concentrate them more in sign districts, but you would reduce them elsewhere within the city, so you have a net benefit reduction in the visual clutter that we have within the city. That's the mandatory sign reduction feature. The other part of the sets of recommendations that came forward from the Planning Commission, very strict findings for how you establish a sign district. Care has to be taken that they don't impact residential neighborhoods. They have to go through complete environmental clearance, full compliance with CEQA. that the signs are going to have a unified design and architectural theme. So all of these findings, there are 5 in total, provide a guarantee that sign districts, when they're established, are going to be appropriate for the neighborhood, and that there will be a public benefit of reduction of signs in the surrounding sign impact area.
Now, are the findings to establish a sign district different from what we have now, the new proposal?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
How so?
They are more specific, they amplify, there are a greater number of them, and again, it pays much more attention to the impacts between sign districts and any kind of an adjacent neighborhood. Those types of findings are not in the current regulations to provide those types of protections for existing neighborhoods around the sign district. The new findings do provide that level of protection and required analysis.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's also a major indicator in how the map in of itself, where these signs are actually being identified geographically, does also limit where these districts can be
That's correct. That's correct, Councilman. Right now, a sign district can be established over any industrial zone, any commercial zone in the city. And the Planning Commission's recommendation reduces that by over 90%. By over 90%, limiting it to downtown, to designated regional centers, and to designated regional commercial areas.
So to achieve a goal and to make sure that what you described, what occurred, is prevented, because we've reduced the host sites significantly by 90%.
And that, of course, is consistent with the direction provided by the council motion, which asked the planning department to come up with land use criteria for how sign districts should be designated. Right now, there are no land use criteria. It's basically, as you said, the exception that can swallow the rule. So the entire city, literally, the best sites could be designated as a sign district. Again, a 90% reduction in the acreage in the city that could be designated a sign district. That's the Planning Commission's proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. We'll proceed with the public hearing. We have Terry Smith and then Ryan Brooks. You have 1 minute. Mr. Smith, are you still here? Former planner.
Good afternoon, Councilman, Mr. President, Chair, members of the council.
Good afternoon, Mr. Smith.
My name is Terry Smith, 4325 Victoria Park Drive. And I'm here basically to encourage you to accept the recommendations of the Planning Commission, and with the deletion of the additional grandfathered districts. I think the Planning Commission was wise in its setting up of criteria, and I'm specifically concerned about the Midtown Crossing, a term that is not recognized anywhere on on any municipal document. It's a merchandising term for a large hole in the ground, and which touches a single-family, low-density neighborhood, and I would encourage you to exclude it. It's designated community commercial in the community plan.
Thank you, sir. Ryan Brooks, and just keep an eye on the clock. We got 1 minute.
Good afternoon, council members. Ryan Brooks, CBS Outdoor. First, I want to thank you for the time and opportunity to speak today. I wasn't actually going to talk today. I was going to withdraw my card, but hearing a lot of the talk about the sign districts has great concern. The goal of the city is to reduce the number of signs in the city. There is an easier way of doing it without opening up the city to huge amounts of liability. Number one, you would just have a straight out ban of all new signs in the city. And if you wanted to put up new signs, you would have to have a reduction program. And so each council member would have the ability to choose what he or she wanted to do within their district. They would charge you. They would say, if you want to put up a new sign, you have to take down 3, 4, or 5 signs. You have less amount of signs within the city. you don't have to have these many exceptions. You have 15 or 20 exceptions. And when our outside counsel looked at it and said, the city's going to open itself to great liability when it doesn't have to. This intent of what you're trying to do, I understand the way you're going about it is not the best way to achieve your goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ben Shu, Howard Sunken, and Derek Ryder.
Good afternoon. Bishu, representing related companies. We're the developer for the Grand Avenue project in downtown LA. And I just have one comment. The proposed ordinance, as it deals with sign districts, does not take into account areas like Bunker Hill that are not characterized by excessive signage. We do intend to apply for a sign district for the Grand Avenue area. And it literally is an area with no signs to take down. So we would suggest, and as the planning department had recommended in an earlier staff report, that an accommodation be made for those types of areas that have other types of blight and other types of needs for community beautification and community benefits besides sign reduction, and that new sign districts be allowed to fulfill a finding based on other types of community beautification and community benefits where there is not excessive signage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Howard Sunken. Not here. Derek Ryder.
Mr. Sunken did have to leave, but he did talk to staff.
Okay. Derek Ryder, Veronica Perez-Becker, and David Goldberg.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Derek Ryder, 980 North Hoover Street. And I'm coming from the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight in Los Angeles. I'm largely in favor of the draft approved by Planning Commission and therefore am speaking against amendments that would water down this much-needed regulation and especially the proposed grandfathering of 6 projects with pending applications or council file numbers, but no Planning Commission approval: Metro, Universal, Metropolis, Midtown Crossing, Panorama Place, City West, and Koreatown. The lobbyists for the billboard industry argue that it would be unfair to applicants to deny their applications given their investment of time and money in the process. But we as a city have to weigh the relative loss of a handful of developers and their projects versus the loss of our public space to unfettered commercialism and the commensurate loss to our shared quality of life and property values that go along with that. In terms of the relative scale of these proposed sign districts, they represent large swaths of Pico Union, Koreatown, and high-profile locations in downtown, Midtown, and Studio City.
Thank you, sir.
And because most, if not all of them, would not be approved in the current form under the sign ordinance, this would represent a major giveaway to the billboard industry. Thanks.
Thank you.
Veronica Perez-Becker, Central City Association. We ask for several changes to protect our businesses, including eliminating the 5-acre requirement for comprehensive sign districts, which prejudices high-density areas like downtown. Over half of downtown's properties are less than an acre, and only 4% of downtown properties are over 5 acres. Many of our treasured downtown cultural institutions and significant commercial properties, including Mocha, FITM, the Walt Disney Concert Hall, LA Mart, Los Angeles Athletic Club, and the Korea Air Project, are all less than 5 acres and would not be eligible for the comprehensive sign program. So we ask that you eliminate the 5 acres and keep the 100,000 square foot requirement. We also ask that you allow more time for temporary signs. Giving property owners only 3 months a year to advertise leasing and sales is not enough time. Other sophisticated jurisdictions like Atlanta, San Francisco, and Chicago are able to successfully distinguish temporary real estate signs and give up to 1 year or more for these types of signs, and we need that in this market especially.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We also ask for digital signs and that you keep the grandfathered signs.
Thank you very much. David Goldberg, Cindy Stewart, Beth Gordy, and John Anderson.
Good afternoon, David Goldberg, Latham and Watkins. First off, we appreciate staff's recommended revision today to provide an exception in the relief provision for signage authorized under CUPs and variances. In addition, we request that the ordinance be clear that comprehensive sign programs can be consolidated with other applications pursuant to LAMC Section 1236, and in addition that there be flexibility in the implementation of the ordinance to allow for applicants that have already been processing variances and CUPs for signage and have had hearings to be able to switch to a comprehensive sign program application without a new hearing. In addition, we understand from staff that the new ordinance would not impact signage rights granted under existing specific plans. We appreciate that clarification. We also continue to believe that amendments to those specific plans authorizing signage should continue to be allowed. And in addition, we also support the grandfathering of the sign districts and special sign ordinances that were included in the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Wow. 1 minute a minute. Pretty good. Cindy Starrett?
Cindy Starrett from Latham and Watkins. Thank you so much to the committee and to staff. Many improvements have been made, but I want to focus on one of the directions the committee gave last time to staff, which was to recognize creative entertainment on-site uses like Universal Studios. Steve Nissan testified about the Gorilla at City Walk and the Globe. These are not sign districts. These are sign programs. These are on-site signs directly related to city jobs and revenue. The flexibility that's needed for Universal, for example, has not been provided in the staff recommendations today. There could be a better definition of interior signs to help them. There could be flexibility for comprehensive sign programs to help them, or there could be special provisions for sports and entertainment facilities, but none of those have been recommended to you, and we ask that you continue to consider that concern. On interior signs, the staff report said that there would be some additional recommendations. We believe those could be achieved with some additional time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Beth Gordon, John Anderson, Dennis Hathaway, and Ruben Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Beth Gordy with Latham and Watkins. We request that you continue to regulate on-site signs under existing provisions. The proposed sign ordinance will be difficult for businesses with legitimate on-site signs to navigate. One of the unintended consequences of this ordinance is that such businesses could unknowingly violate the ordinance with on-site identification signs that promote their business. It is not equitable to severely penalize such businesses. Therefore, the new enforcement provisions should only apply to off-site signs. Businesses with on-site signs should be given notice and an opportunity to cure, and the right to private action should only apply to off-site signs. In addition, we request that you retain the city's ability to approve adequate relief provisions, including variances, conditional use permits, and specific plans to give the city flexibility to permit necessary on-site signs in this diverse city. Thank you.
Thank you. John Anderson, Dennis Hathaway.
Good afternoon, John Alderson with Westfield. And I thought you were kidding about the Laker game. First, I'd like to thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank you for all your hard work on this ordinance. It's difficult to address the concerns of many, and Westfield appreciates the continued opportunity to comment. We have submitted previous comments, most of which have been addressed. Today, I want to focus on one last issue, and that is the occasion of unique situations. No ordinance will ever address every possible circumstance. Because of this, I ask you to define a relief mechanism from the comprehensive sign program to address unique situations. This will provide a method to address that which is currently unknown. On behalf of our hundreds of retailers and our company, Westfield, we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Dennis Hathaway, Ruben Gonzalez, Mark Gastineau, and Richard Spicer.
Thank you. Dennis Hathaway with the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. I want to thank you, the committee members, for your patience and your endurance in hearing this issue. We want to support the Labange proposal. Sign districts, limiting sign districts downtown. Sign districts, that kind of signage is appropriate, like LA Live in a high-rise area. It's going to be very difficult to contain that kind of signage in most of the low-rise commercial areas of the city and not have some impact on residential areas. We also oppose the grandfathering of the existing sign district proposals. We realize that this is potential. It's not, doesn't approve those districts. However, just to take one example, the Metro Universal project has proposed over 50,000 square feet of off-site signage, including full animated signs and unlimited size super graphics. This kind of impact could be huge if these go through. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Gonzalez, Mark Gastineau, Richard Spicer, and Gus Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez. I'm here representing the Hotel Association of Los Angeles. The simple fact is that this ordinance will not reach the stated goals regarding on-site signage. The problems with on-site signage faced by the city are a matter of enforcement, not a matter of rules. If this ordinance continues on the path it's on and is passed as is, all that we're going to end up with is another layer of rules that cannot be enforced. Right now, you have 2 to 3 inspectors for on-site signage enforcement. In the coming budget, it looks like the code enforcement is going to be cut by about 40%. That's going to impact those positions as well. So what you're going to end up with is a new layer of regulation that's not enforced. You're going to end up with people putting up illegal signs because they're not likely to get caught, and you're going to end up with people not pulling permits to fix their facades of their properties because they don't want to risk the cost or problems or lose the current sign that they have. So it's all negative. What I would ask this committee to do, even if you don't agree with it, is direct the planning department to create another option. Create an ordinance that would bifurcate on-site from off-site so that when you get to full council, at least your colleagues will have the option of that choice.
Thank you very much. Mark Gastineau, Richard Spicer, and Vince Navarro.
Mark Gastineau, 22 Tremonti Court, Sacramento, California. I'm the Government Affairs Chair for the California Sign Association and Sign Users Council of California. We have been educating and working with state legislation and local city and county governments on ordinances for over 50 years. We see drastic economic impacts of what's being presented here. We have given written testimony and had several meetings to try to discuss these things and have contacted staff, and they will not give us a face-to-face to work with them on these issues. I asked that the chairman and his committee direct them to slow down this ordinance and sit with us and let's mitigate some of these issues that are going to have drastic impacts and possible litigation on these issues. Thank you.
I have to ask this question. The New York Jets.
It's my second cousin.
Your second cousin, all right. Okay. All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Spicer, representing the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council. We have supported many of the provisions and especially the standards. There are 2 items that did not get in. We think right of private action should be broad, not limited to a narrow property place. And we think there ought to be for non-conforming signs an opportunity for amortization as done in Los Angeles County. We are also opposed to grandfathering. We think that creates more possibilities for difficulties with the Ninth Circuit Court, which would be useful to hear from. 2 compliments, that's building and safety. We say in our comments they have not looked at our area for illegal signs. I found out today from top management they did, and that will be posted within a few weeks. We're very appreciative of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gus Navarro, Duke Russell, Jeff Aaron, I believe it's Barbara Broad. I apologize, it's hard to read that. I'm sorry, sir. You can submit it in writing, though.
Good afternoon. Gus Navarro, 701 North Lacme Avenue, Wilmington, California. The city of Los Angeles is going to face 2 major problems here. We got 2 big problems we're going to be facing with one stick to beat. It's going to be very tough. On-site and off-site has to be separated. We got to look at the future of the business in the city of Los Angeles, and we got to hope business comes to Los Angeles. It's going to make it so difficult when a business comes to Los Angeles, decides where to come because of a signed ordinance. This handout that the planning department, I believe, developed has a lot of false information that's not correct. And it's very bad what they're printing here on city taxpayers' money that's misrepresenting what this ordinance is. This was never presented to any type of forum or anything that was out there. This is the first time I see this, and they're talking about a pole sign on here saying right now you're allowed 400 square feet, 42 feet tall. They're saying here 25 feet tall, 200 square feet. It's not. It's 100 square feet. It's false representation. So I would ask that planning separate on-site and off-site and give us a chance for future business to come to LA. In this economic crisis, we need it, and we need enforcement. We need to work.
Thank you, sir. Duke Russell, Japan, Barbara Broad, I believe, and Marilyn Corn. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Duke Russell. I've lived in Hollywood most of my 83 years. Special sign districts, in my estimation, are ridiculous. I'm sure President Obama would want this changed. No one is speaking about what it's doing to the children. There are 200,000 people living in Hollywood, children going to school and coming from school are bombarded with these messages to buy beer and tequila and every other product, and I think it's wrong. I'm for the Labange proposition, and for heaven's sakes, let's let our beautiful Los Angeles and Hollywood and the other districts be beautiful again, like Obama's Chicago. I went there during the summer. The buildings are absolutely beautiful. Los Angeles deserves to have beautiful buildings. You're all doing great work, but in this case, let's make our city beautiful so the children can grow up without these constant bombardments on our city streets and sidewalks.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, Jeff Aaron, Bob Broad, Mike Cohen, and Bennett Cohen.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jeff Aaron, legal counsel for the California Sign Association. We echo the concerns of opposition stated previously here today. Having drafted sign ordinances for nearly 20 years, I can categorically say that this is probably, although well-intended, one of the most poorly drafted proposals that I've had a chance to review, in particular because we really haven't had the chance to sit down with the planning department and identify the problems that they see and the solutions that we have from our years and years of experience. Not only does it fail to achieve its stated purposes, it seeks to go, if you'll excuse the comparison, where no sign ordinance has gone before. The proposal unreasonably limits allowable square footage for an on-premise business sign, not based on the particular tenant's need, but instead upon a total per parcel. This fails to take into account the effect upon new businesses occupying existing shopping centers where the signage allocation is exhausted. We urge you to separate the on-premise from off-premise at this time.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Thank you, members of the committee. Chairman Reyes, my name is Barbara Brady, 2001 Malcolm Avenue, Westside Neighborhood Council member and Westwood South of Santa Monica Boulevard Homeowners Association president. I have 6 points to make on the current proposed draft. 1, we do agree with Councilman Labange's proposal and recommendation on sign districts. We're opposed to grandfathering and believe that any new signage in our city should have a mandatory sign reduction attached to it, anywhere, anytime. Enforcements and penalties. This committee, as well as the city's planning commission, sent back to the city attorney a request to come back with language pertaining to whether business licenses can be revoked from sign companies should they not comply with the code over numerous attempts or pay their fines. We've never gotten an answer back on that and would like to see it. We do believe there should be language clearly banning digital conversions. We'd like to see language pertaining to sign districts or signage adjacent to scenic roadways or scenic highways included. Century City is designated with scenic roadways, and we need those protections. Regarding regulation of digital displays, we can't wait a year for restrictions on brightness and timing.
Thank you very much.
And appeals.
Marilyn Cohen and Bennett Cohen. Please come forward. Marilyn Cohen, Bennett Cohen, and Phil Rick.
Marilyn Cohen, 1906 Prosser Avenue, LA 90025. As the Vice President of Westwood South of Santa Monica Homeowners Association, I am representing the owners of over 3,800 homes. Our community has strongly expressed their opposition to the proliferation of billboards and supergraphics. Let me begin by asking you a question. When you visit any places celebrated for its beauty, Santa Barbara, Marin County, or Paris, do you stop and think, boy, what this place needs is a bunch of billboards? The guardians of those places have taken seriously their responsibility to be shepherds of the essential quality of those locales, and they have become the timeless reminders of our higher and better selves. Los Angeles, on the other hand, has succumbed to the bright lights, big money, siren call of the billboard industry, and we can all see where that has taken this once beautiful city. Are the people of Los Angeles telling you that our role model should be the Las Vegas Strip? If preserving the natural beauty of the city does not appeal to your sense of responsibility, perhaps the issue of safety may tweak your conscience. Contrary to the self-serving studies commissioned by the billboard industry, as noted,
thank you.
And I please do not grandfather. Thank you, Councilman Huizar, for asking the appropriate question.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's not as safe. And thank you
Thank
to
you
Councilman Tom Labange.
Bennett Cohen, Phil Rick, and then Mike Gatto.
Bennett Cohen, I urge you not to grandfather in the special use sign districts which are awaiting approval. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal has given the city the opportunity to take a step back, stop the runaway train of out-of-control signage, and rediscover the lovely city that was once Los Angeles. Federal Judge Audrey Collins has clearly stated that the numerous exceptions written into our code or permitted by benign neglect have opened the floodgates for larger and brighter and more animated signs without the opportunity for the city to close those gates. Please do not include the sign district exceptions in this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Fahad
to catch a flight. I'm the pinch hitter, and I'm Mike Gatto. So my name is Mike Gatto. I'm with the law offices of Mayor Brown. We represent Summit Media, which is one of the small companies without a settlement agreement and a company with a tiny percentage of the market. We believe clear and meaningful billboard regulations benefit everyone, both business and the public. Everyone at the city has done an admirable job so far of drafting the ordinance. Our sole concern remains the settlement agreements, which, as you know, granted sensational benefits to 4 companies. The current draft ordinance addresses the settlement agreements only in part and addresses them only in the intent section. It does nothing to affect the existing digital billboards in the city, which the public cares about so much, and which there are hundreds in the city. It does nothing to address the double-facing issue. It does nothing to affect the grandfathering of the major sign companies' non-conforming permits, aka the Permit Amnesty Program. Now, we leave it up to you to determine whether this is a wise choice, but we believe based on recent court decisions, it's illegal, and it's certainly unfair. If this ordinance does not apply to the special entitlements of the major billboard companies who own 90% of the signs in the city, then the public has a right to know, because this ordinance might not be as effective as people think. We respectfully suggest you amend the ordinance to address these issues and to level the playing field. Thank you.
Mr. is he here? Okay. Jeff McConnell, Vanessa Rodriguez, Nicole Shahanian.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Jeff McConnell from Marty Berghoff & Associates, representing the California Sign Association. In case you missed it last time, I wanted to reiterate some points from the LAEDC report. The LAEDC is very concerned about the impact this ordinance will have upon business in Los Angeles. It specifically states that reduced signage will negatively impact sales. This puts your M&D at risk. That means less sales tax, less business tax, and less property tax. This is not the time to risk those revenue sources with the amount of layoffs you have before you. Further, existing businesses are favored over new businesses, so trying to bring new businesses is severely hampered by this ordinance. National is favored over local small businesses. All we will have are businesses who have a national presence. Finally, increased congestion as consumers slow down to read hard-to-read signs. We also request that you reconsider electronic message center signs. The CLA recommended an electronic message center sign for the convention center yesterday morning, and we direct staff to write an alternative ordinance for consideration that separates the on-site issue from the off-site issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Is it too early for good evening? Vanessa Rodriguez, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, and I stand here on behalf of the business community a bit disgruntled. After about 3 hours 3 weeks ago on this issue, the business community expressed its concerns and petitioned this committee to bifurcate the issues so that we have a separation between on-site and off-site issues, and unfortunately that was not part of the discussion. So I'm here before you once more asking for the bifurcation of the on-site and off-site. Additionally, the Western Exterminator Company had an op-ed published in the LABJ, and I'd like to take a moment to read a few sentences from their publication. Although it is good service that keeps customers, a good sign drives customers in, and our use of creative signage has allowed Western Exterminator Company to remain a strong and viable firm for nearly 90 years. Our sign is literally priceless to our business, generating millions of dollars every year in revenues, which is why we take issue with the City of Los Angeles' attempt to impose undue hardships by adding new limits on on-site business.
Thank you very much. Nicole Shahanian, Stuart Waldman, William Delbeck, and Barbara Monahan Burke. Nicole Shahanian, are you here? Stuart Waldman.
My name is Stuart Waldman. I'm president of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. We represent more than 300 businesses and over 50,000 employees. The business community asks that you oppose this measure as currently written. This is a measure that will be unenforced, just like the current measure is unenforced. We have also opposed the Labange Amendment, which will create undue burden on business. The fact is, one size does not fit all. Chatsworth and downtown are completely different. But what this ordinance does is puts one-size-fits-all measures into place. We need help. The business community needs help. And I ask that you do not enact something that will make it more difficult for a business to come to this city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. William Delbert, Monahan Burke, and Jacqueline Kerr, I believe.
Honorable Council members, one topic, 3 points, transition rules. We agree that the existing sign district application should be grandfathered. Quite importantly, like specific plans, we believe equally important that amendments to existing sign districts be grandfathered to not create disparate rules. And finally, and this is a point of current concern, we've heard repeatedly from staff and city attorney that state law rights like vesting maps and development agreements are already vested. However, in the last month and a half, I've had a client try repeatedly to get a vested sign approved. It took city attorney time, it took building and safety time, and it took my client's time. It seems so clear to just make it absolutely clear in the ordinance that vesting maps and development agreements are grandfathered. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Monahan Burke, and the last speaker is Jacqueline Kerr.
Barbara Monahan Burke, speaking for both the Studio City Neighborhood Council and Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. We express our gratitude to Council Member Tom Labange and support his position that sign districts should be limited to one specific geographical area of the city, the downtown center. Further, we agree with his provision B from Section 9, paragraph B1 should be removed from the draft ordinance. Los Angeles City Council supported Representative Mike Feuer's AB 109, which has not been able to come out of its second committee at this time. We propose that you pass this ordinance as part of this sign ordinance or in conjunction with it to make sure that we take full advantage of finding out from federal and national studies within 2.5 years, so we'd need an ICO on digital until then, totally, about the public health, safety, and environmental historical effects. And that would be,
thank you very much, Ms.
I just want to make one point, out of budget, that this would be the national and federal studies, so we wouldn't have to pay for them.
Thank you, ma'am. Our last speaker, Ms. Kerr. Thank you for your patience.
I'm Jacqueline Kerr, Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council and the Barnstall Art Park Foundation. I have not consulted with my board about this, but I know that they would be in very much agreement that we are all very happy with the position being taken by Tom Labange, and particularly the concern about grandfathering. As Ms. Weitzer pointed out to you, you've got a problem with semantics with this, and it will eventually wind up in a courtroom, and I do believe that the last thing that the people of Los Angeles need are more fines, more penalties. So please do look into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Okay, I'd like to ask Andrew Edelman, I'd like to come to the microphone, and as he is coming up, we know there is a sense of frustration in that for several years we have been trying to find a way to establish the capacity for the city to enforce its laws. I know there have been different reasons for why we have not implemented these laws. So, Mr. Edelman, given what has been stated, given the definitions that have been articulated by the planning department, I'd like to get for you to state on the record your position on this ordinance and your capacity to implement this ordinance, and some background as to or observations as how we see the city working as one city to implement and actually enforce these laws.
Councilmember, thank you. I am pleased to share with you that the ordinance that you passed in December in terms of off-site inspection program, we have already surveyed 5,000 signs throughout the city, covered much of the city, so we are working on that expeditiously. As a matter of fact, you had allocated three inspectors, and I have internally assigned 20 inspectors to perform the duties. So we have done 5,000 of what we anticipate to be 7,500 to 8,000 signs surveyed. However, before I go on commenting about the ordinance, yesterday there was extensive conversations about the on-site and off-site definition, because this ordinance hinges on on-site and off-site definition. I understand the planning staff introduced that definition today. I was en route. Could I ask Mr. Alan Bell to read that definition again?
The definition that we're proposing be included in the new ordinance is as follows, and this is the definition of off-site signing. The intention of this new language is to remove any ambiguity. So I'm reading it. A sign that displays any message directing attention to a business, product, service, profession, commodity, activity, event, person, or institution which is not conducted, sold, manufactured, produced, offered, or occurs on the premises where the sign is located, or any ideological, political, or other non-commercial message. So that would be the definition of an off-site sign. An on-site sign is anything that is not an off-site sign.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that definition is not what was discussed yesterday. It has been changed, and as I walked here, it was handed to me, and it came as a shock to me, because it is not the definition which was discussed yesterday. It has been changed substantially since yesterday, unbeknown to me and my staff. It came as quite a surprise.
Can you be very specific how it has been
Sure.
changed?
It has been specifically added by adding the following language to the end of it. It has added the word "or any ideological, political, or other non-commercial messages." So as it is introduced, it adds that phrase, and it changes the concept. Also, and again, the whole ordinance is key to the definition of on-site and off-site is the key. Also, the following verbiage has been taken out of the definition unbeknown to building and safety. Again, I was informed when I walked in here, the verbiage that has been taken out is the verbiage "or any other commercial message." And again, that definition is key.
Mr. Edelman, I hear what you're saying. I want to hear from the city attorney, because we're not going to get out of this room until I am very confident that you can emphatically state for the record that we can enforce this ordinance. So could you please clarify, Madam Attorney, and or any other planning department representative, to make sure we understand that the public feels confident that we can enforce this law.
And what we ask for is a clear, concise, enforceable definition of on-site and off-site.
Madam Attorney.
For the record, Sharon Cedar of Cardinal City Attorney's Office. Mr. Bell was mistaken. The problem was that too many definitions have been gone back and forth. We will make a clear definition and have it in the ordinance that's presented to council. It will not include a reference to non-commercial speech, and it will include the phrase "or any other commercial message."
Now, yesterday we had a discussion. Why can't we go with that definition? Can you clarify that?
The definition which was agreed on yesterday, council member, was the following, if I may read it.
Let me ask the planning department rep.
Vince Bertoni, Deputy Director. I'd like to defer to Mr. Bell, because he's the one who handled the issue from yesterday to today.
Well, again, the language that we had yesterday was appropriate language. Then there were subsequent drafts. Again, the language that the City Attorney Sharon Cedar of Cardenas would read is the appropriate language that we want to have included within that ordinance.
So, Mr. Edelman, again, I want everybody to be on the same page.
Right.
We would be glad to sit down with planning and city attorney and work it out, or we could work it out now.
Let's work it out now.
Sure. Again, this definition is the key to the entire ordinance.
give us what you understand was enforceable.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Edelman.
Oh.
Yes, you have that
Okay,
definition
all
you're
right.
about to
The
state.
definition which was agreed yesterday was as follows. And this was the definition that the Building and Safety and the City Attorney and Planning agreed on yesterday, and we were not aware of any changes to it until I walked in this around 20 minutes ago. The definition was off-site sign, a sign that displays any message directing attention to a business, product, service, profession, commodity, activity, event, person, institution, or any other commercial message which is not conducted, sold, manufactured, produced, offered, or occurs on the premises where the site is located. And the on-site sign is a sign other than an off-site sign. And the change was proposed by Chief Deputy City Attorney Michelson and agreed to by Building and Safety.
Mr. Bertoni.
Mr. Bell?
Again, there have been so many definitions that have been floating around within the last 24 hours, and I do apologize for the confusion. That is the language that was read yesterday. Any of those subsequent interpretations and flippings around. So again, for the record, the definition of off-site sign that the Planning Department recommends is as follows. A sign that displays any message directing attention to a business, product, service, profession, commodity, activity, event, person, institution, or other commercial message, which is not conducted, sold, manufactured, offered, or does not occur on the premises where the sign is located. And I think that this is the language that would resolve that particular issue, and is the language that the Planning Department recommends.
Okay, I'm being very meticulous about this step because we want to enforce this law. So, Mr. Edelman, are we there?
Yes, we are, with one exception of a word, any, which was missed, but otherwise, yes, we are there.
Okay, so we will make sure that we fit the proper definition so that it can be enforceable. Again, I don't want to see any more excuses of why we cannot enforce this law. We are talking about the personnel. Now we have an assessment of what's out there, and I'll continue about our follow-up steps, but I want to get past this phase first. So that was very critical, Mr. Edelman, that you make that statement and that we know that the Director of Building and Safety will enforce this law, and I want to emphasize that. That being said, colleagues, questions you may have? So it's...
Thank you. So I apologize, Mr. Chair, I stepped out of the room for a second, but we did get a commitment that this is going to be enforceable.
Yes.
Right? Because as some of the speakers said, and which we all have heard for the last number of hours, that we've heard this both in council and in chambers, a lot of this has to do with enforcement, and we want to make sure, as some of the speakers mentioned, that we are not just creating more unenforceable rules, and I think that's key to this. And I think it's also key that we go after those that are not complying with our rules. I think a lot of it has to do with folks who simply know they can get away with it, which was one of my questions. I know that we are increasing penalties for those who do not comply. It's a deterrent. It's more like we're approaching it as a deterrent or we have a capacity issue, but now we are being told by the general manager of Building and Safety that we will have the capacity. On the deterrent part, I'd like to hear from the Planning Department how this will deter people from from putting up illegal signs. Should they be? How is it different from the current penalties, and how does the new ordinance apply those fees? The penalties?
Well, the penalties are significantly higher. Right now, we can assess if a nuisance, any violation of the zoning code is considered a nuisance, we can impose a $2,500 a day fine for nuisances. That provision is almost never used right now, and that applies to any violation of the zoning code. If there is a violation, the building and safety will cite and say they have to pay what's called a non-compliance fee, meaning a fee for an inspection to determine whether or not they in fact have come into compliance. The new fees are administrative civil penalties, and the key word there is administrative. Right now, our enforcement actions are tied to the city attorney taking violators to court and forcing them to comply. It's a very lengthy and it's a very cumbersome process. Other cities that have addressed the enforcement issue, such as New York, and the particular model that we are recommending is based upon the city of New York, have addressed this through administrative civil penalties, where in this particular case, the Department of Building and Safety would be able to issue an order to comply and say that if the sign is not taken down or is not otherwise brought into compliance with the sign regulations, on such and such a date, civil penalties will begin to accrue. They would have, let's say, a 10-day, a 15-day, or a 5-day grace period to take down that illegal sign. It's up to Building and Safety to make that particular call. So they have the opportunity to cure the violation, but they also know they have the big stick of the heavy penalties that will be imposed if they do not comply with the sign regulations. Money talks. It's a very effective deterrent, and we also have embedded within this particular ordinance the ability to collect the penalties. If we can't ensure collection, then imposing the penalties will not work. How do we do that? Two ways. One, we allow the city council itself to place a lien on a property if the property owner does not pay up the civil penalties. Sign companies are not the property owners, but they are in fact the owners of the signs. How can we get them to pay up? We can refer them to a collection agency, and the Office of Finance has a roster of collection agencies on contract. If they don't pay up, their credit ratings can be ruined and their business operations can be seriously affected. In New York, that has perfected this particular model, they have gained far greater compliance with the sign code than we have been able to achieve with our limited enforcement tools.
Okay. Now, on average, how much higher are the penalties now compared to our existing ordinance?
$2,500 a day if there's a nuisance, and you have to go through a whole process to do that. We're recommending fees that vary from a low of $2,000 a day for the smallest sign, up to $48,000 a day for the largest sign and for repeat violators. Again, because we're saying that both the sign owner and the property owner are both properties, those penalties need to be doubled because they're both equally assessed against both. So it's really $4,000 a day up to $96,000 a day for one particular violation of the owner, and the sign owner and the property owner are in fact two different entities.
Yeah. Two questions for Building and Safety. One is, a large part of this discussion in council at one point was that we didn't even know what signs were out there, proper documentation. Now, where are we with that? That was a big issue. We didn't know where to go, how to enforce this, because we didn't have proper. Do we have that? And do we have proper documentation to know which are legitimate and which are not legitimate?
Yes, Council Member. The City Council passed the ordinance for off-site sign inspection program back in 2002, I believe. For various legal reasons, it was put on hold. The City Council again passed that ordinance on December 17, 2008. The mayor signed it on December 23, 2008, and it became effective, I believe, on December 26, 2008. We immediately started doing the survey and inventory of the signs. So far, we have inventoried 5,000 signs throughout the city. We estimate there is approximately 8,000 signs throughout the city, so we have done approximately 60-65% of those signs inventoried. And in addition to that, we have the off-site sign inspection program had allocated 3 staff members or 3 inspectors. I took the management prerogative and assigned 20 inspectors to do that from other functions, so that's why we have been able to get through it so fast. I do want to make a comment about the other
before we get off this one.
Sure.
So we do have a survey, and by the time this gets implemented, if it's passed, we will know which are legitimate and which are not. The survey will be completed by then.
We are making progress on survey. Probably the survey will be completed within next 2 months or so of all the signs.
Okay.
However, after the survey is completed, there is the legal tug of war, which is always involved with sign issues, because if this department decides that it is not legal, it doesn't have permit, they appeal it to the commission, then it goes through the process. I also want to ask you, in terms of the fines that Mr. Bell stated, and that is one of the more positive aspects of the ordinance in front of you, I strongly support that. I request that those money to be allocated to come back to building and safety so we can hire inspectors to enforce the sign ordinance. Allow me to explain this. 4 years ago, the Department of Building and Safety Code Enforcement Bureau had approximately 210 staff members. 210 4 years ago. After the current budget is completed, we will have approximately 105 staff members in Code Enforcement Bureau, half. And of course, with that, we have got the ever-expanding menu of ordinances that we have to enforce. If you really want the sign ordinance to be enforced, we need to make sure those revenues generated as a result of this ordinance comes back to hire inspectors.
I just want to, there's something that's really important here is, I had asked for a report back on how much has been paid to date.
Yes.
Regarding the number of signs paid, and I thank you for the report. Given the current entities as far as sign companies go that have cooperated, we are at 1,208,466. That reflects 6,189 signs that have been paid for in terms of what we need to implement this law. So the 1.2 million can be dedicated to staff, correct?
That is correct. That is on a 3-year cycle, and that pays for off-site sign inspection program, which is a total of 5 staff members, 3 inspectors, 1 senior inspector, and 1 clerical staff.
Okay, so I just want to make sure it's clear for my colleagues that funds have been brought into the process, and we do have personnel that can start implementing the law should it pass. Thank you.
However, Council Member, if I had stayed with the 3 inspectors, which was allocated as part of the ordinance, it would have taken 3 years to do the surveys citywide. And only by assigning 20 or 17 inspectors from other functions was what we were able to do a quick sweep and do about 5,000, about 60% of the signs within a 2.5-3 months period of time.
Thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.
So we're going through our budget process right now.
Yes.
And if you were to estimate how much, and you know our fiscal situation, but it is what it is. If you were to estimate how much funding you would need for the additional inspectors to feel comfortable that you are fully implementing this ordinance and going after non-compliant signs, how much would you need?
Okay. I am, just like you, I'm painfully aware of the shortcomings of general fund, and often the inspectors in the code enforcement are funded through general fund. That's why I made the request that these fees collected from the violators to be routed back to building and safety to hire additional inspectors, because I want to have a steady stream of revenue to enforce the signs, because under the current situation we get 2 pots of money for enforcing the signs. One is the off-site sign inspection program, which is the document that Councilmember Reyes referred to, and that's on a 3-year cycle. Basically that $1.2 million, we have to make it last for 3 years. The other one is the general funded, and the general funded is ever shrinking for the obvious reason. So I want to create a third source of revenue, somewhat similar to highly successful building permit enterprise fund that all 3 of the council members are familiar with. So as these revenues from violators are collected, and they are substantial sum, they go to that pot of money so we can hire additional inspectors to address the needs and the concerns of neighborhood councils.
Thank you. And I think your enterprise fund, the creation of that has prevented us from going into further deficit in our general fund, so it's worked there. And can you do us a favor and draft some language to that effect so that we could hopefully have some direction in this we're adopting that budget within a week or so for next fiscal year. so that hopefully, if we get the support of the full council, we could give you the resources you need to ensure that you have the inspectors you need to go out there and fully implement this. So if you provide us that language, we will be able to hopefully give some direction in our budget for next year.
I will be glad to do that.
Thank you. Another item I had was there's the sign program. It has a provision in there that it would only qualify for a sign program. Oh, this is for planning. Thank you very much, Mr. Natum. That it would have, you would have to be greater than 5 acres.
5 or more acres.
And 100,000 square feet. Now, I think there's consensus amongst everybody who's looked at this that it would make sense to keep sign districts in downtown Los Angeles, and I certainly agree with that. I'm working on a program to revitalize our historic core on Broadway. But as I look at those areas in downtown that will hopefully qualify as a sign district, some of the areas that we have defined in certain ways, for example, the fashion district, some of our civic center that has some cultural, civic areas that could benefit from a certain aesthetic appearance if we provide it with a sign district. Most of those are less than 5 acres. So I'm really concerned about us not getting to our goal in downtown about allowing sign districts in downtown because of this greater than 5 acres requirement. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes. I mean, just as in terms of background, what is the whole purpose of a comprehensive sign program? We think that the baseline ordinance provides adequate business signage at a 2.5 to 1 ratio, but that there may be unique circumstances for multi-tenant properties, shopping centers, where additional signage may be needed, and that it should be reviewed on a discretionary process. And so that, therefore, to make sure that the types of properties that are going to be eligible to submit applications to us and to be reviewed don't include any typical single-use skyscraper or a high-rise building, that we include an acreage requirement, because those are the properties that are going to tend to be multi-tenant properties, and that is the intention of a sign program application. If we remove the acreage requirement, then any property that has vertical square footage of that amount would be able to have excess signage than what they need, because that type of signage is really only appropriate at the ground floor for retail purposes, and it does not involve multi-tenant properties. So we think it provides an additional control. And then also, let me add that we're concerned about, in a sense, opening up the floodgates for these types of applications, and so it's an additional control to make sure that only the appropriate properties, existing and proposed ones, would be eligible to submit this type of an application. Yeah. And let me just add that we did some analysis of the types of properties that would be typically eligible to apply for this, various Home Depots, Costco's, and we did analysis of 20 different typical sites, and all of them had 5 or more acres of acreage. For example, including the 7+ Fig site downtown Los Angeles.
And I get it. I think your reasoning for the types of issues we're concerned with may apply to areas outside of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, and where you certainly have large areas, flat areas. But let me request that we delete the 5-acre requirement for downtown Los Angeles.
Another option would be and/or.
If we add and/or, what would that do?
Give you the flexibility. So if you don't have the acreage and you have the square footage, you can have the flexibility to move an application to be considered.
Okay. Let me ask our attorney, because they deal with these and/or questions all the time. Mr. Reyes is proposing that we do...
essentially, instead of eliminating it, provide the and or, so that if there's an option, because Councilman Perry has the same concerns, she's echoing your thoughts in terms of there's certain places in South Los Angeles, South Central, where they don't have the square footage in terms of, the acreage, but they do have the square footage. And so they wanted the flexibility to qualify only if you have the square footage and not need the acreage.
For the record, Chair and Sealer of Cardenas, we could change that. You would take out the and just put or. It wouldn't be an and or.
Okay, just or?
You would replace the and with an or so that you could be either 5 acres or 100,000 square feet.
Yeah, I love it.
And I'm talking about downtown here. I think, because it would be, for the rest of the city, we don't want, we want to allow more sign districts or allow the flexibility for sign districts downtown, but I understand the concern about other areas about allowing it to be easier to establish a sign district. So that's, I'm thinking, can we be specific for downtown?
Well, first,
it's appropriate that we could do that. We elevate, for example, the downtown center within our general plan framework, so it certainly makes planning
Got it.
sense.
If we do that, we'll see the effects of that before it gets to council, but can we make that recommendation and that amendment?
Yes, that's
all right, so the alternative, the either or for the acreage or the square footage would only apply in the downtown center.
The downtown, yes.
And we would specify the downtown center.
Is that, that'll be appropriate, yes.
Which is the same boundaries as the central city plan area.
Okay. Secondly, on the temporary signs, I get what we're trying to accomplish there, but giving a 90-day limit on temporary signs, in this time we're trying to spur economic development, ensure that we lease property, and we are beginning to see more vacancies. I would want to make sure that we help these properties get leased.
Right.
How did the 90-day come up? Why 90 days?
Well, that has been part of the sign code since 1986.
Okay. And how did that come up?
Certainly at the time, that was before
my
time with the
Go ahead.
with the city planning department, but certainly there was a committee that had been constituted, and the feeling was that in order for a sign to truly be considered to be temporary, there has to be a limit on how much time it can be stay up before transitions become, truly, it functions as a permanent sign. So I think back then when the council adopted those recommendations, there was a concern that we limit the stay of a temporary sign, and it was to allow a temporary sign to be up for no more than 30 days, and it must come down for 30 days. That it would get essentially 3 30-day stay-ups over a one-year calendar period.
Okay. And how does that work in practice? I mean, in terms of from the business perspective, do they say, hey, that you're not allowing me enough time to lease my property? Most people come look at this property and then they go back, think about it. From the business perspective, I'm just wondering, if have you heard complaints about that?
There have been concerns about the length of time that's allowed for a temporary sign, and one of the provisions that is within the comprehensive sign program is to allow an extension of that beyond the 90 days as through the sign program. So we do have that on a case-by-case basis to allow an extension of that time. Okay. To do it on a citywide basis by right could cause unintended consequences, and so in recognition of those business concerns, we added that as a flexible provision within the sign program.
Okay, got it. And finally, my last issue, I actually have two more, but I'll
go for it.
One more issue, and it is on historic signage. It seems to me that we would probably need to allow some of these historic buildings, or those buildings that have been deemed historical, the opportunity to revamp their signs, and we want to see them as they were original, and so they would now not have the opportunity to do that through this ordinance. Is that an appropriate assessment?
Not through this ordinance. I mean, we are not proposing any changes to the status of what are called legal nonconforming signs, and most of these historic signs have legal nonconforming status. They can replace a copy. If they are in disrepair, they can be repaired. In fact, the sign code actually requires property owners to maintain their signs in good working operating condition.
Okay.
So if they are in disrepair, actually they are required to put them into good working condition. Any sign has that actual duty. So it would not prevent that. Now, if the sign has been taken down, can it be replaced in the exact location? That is something that we could further explore as to whether or not that building code provision provides an impediment for the restoration of historic signs, let's say, for example, if they are in the basement. But that was not something that we researched as part of the original revisions of the sign code or as part of the 20-item list that we had direction from the Planning Committee on April the 21st.
So you don't see a need for us to add some language that this would not apply to any existing non-conforming signage located within recognized historic districts or located on nominated or designated historic or cultural landmark buildings? They are already protected?
Yes, in my opinion, they are protected because, again, they have non-conforming rights. One of the concerns would be if we gave a different status for signs on historic properties, non-conforming signs on historic properties as opposed to any other type. Will we be setting up a two-tiered system that could invite some kind of a legal challenge because we are providing a preference to that, particular property owners who just happen to own historic properties. Having said that, I think it is something that could bear further investigation and research as part of the follow-up one-year review. But in my opinion, in 90% of the cases, historic signs that are up right now, they can be restored under the existing provisions within the zoning code and within the building code, and there are no impediments to the restoration of those historic signs.
Okay. And finally, there's a section on marquee signs that allows, it says, wall signs on the periphery shall not extend above or below the periphery. Cloth or banner signs or drop roll curtains may be suspended below the exterior periphery and extend within 7 feet of the grade, not closer than 7 feet from the grade. So we have the marquee signs, right? And we're allowing cloth signs to drop from those. Why would we allow cloth signs to drop from those if we already have a sign that is displaying whatever information they would need to display?
Let me turn to those provisions. Those are the marquee sign provisions?
Yes, 14.4.15.
Right. Again, these are provisions that have been in place since 1986, and to my knowledge, these provisions have not necessarily caused problems in terms of enforcement and in provisions.
Yeah.
Again, it's something that we could take a look at. I think the intention here is that these, it says that cloth or banner signs or drop roll curtains may be suspended below the exterior periphery, not closer than 7 feet from the grade. That particular revision is just simply to clarify existing language within the code in terms of that they would have to be at least 7 feet above the sidewalk, essentially.
So they're saying that there could be the signs below the marquee signs. Can you clarify before this comes to council whether we need to revise this or not? Because if we are trying to attack clutter,
right,
and we allow a marquee sign and then some banners to hang from the marquee sign,
right.
You get your objective by just having that one marquee sign as opposed to allowing additional cloth signs hanging from those marquee signs. So if we're trying to get rid of clutter, that might be one area that we could look at. And if you could look at that prior to us coming back to council.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman Rizal. Councilman Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support your goal, Mr. Chair, to report this out today. And I have a couple of items I want to raise, but I think the report backs can come when we're in the full council. I've always wanted to strengthen the sign ordinance, close the super graphic loopholes, and strengthen our efforts in the digital area and increase our enforcement. I think we have a number of items in the measure that that accomplish those goals, I want to just talk about some specific items and just drill down for a few seconds. First on digital, at the last prom hearing, I proposed that the city's existing digital signs should be subject to greater regulatory standards to reduce brightness and illumination, control the amount of flashing, and limit hours of operation. My understanding is planning agrees that this is necessary, but has offered to address this in a year's time rather than now. I'd like to see it addressed now. So one thing I do, and it's by way of a motion rather than, I don't think it's necessarily part of this package, not necessarily, would be to direct planning and building and safety to create standards to reduce brightness and illumination, control the amount of flashing, and limit hours of operation to mitigate impacts on adjacent communities and promote traffic safety. Now, whether that is by necessity part of this package, I don't know. I'd ask you your opinion on that.
I don't think it's necessary as part of this package. This provides baseline recommendations, but I think it would certainly be appropriate that we begin the work to craft appropriate regulations for digital signs as an immediate follow-up effort to the adoption of this particular ordinance.
Okay. So I could make that as a, what would you suggest, Mr. Chair?
We could have the report back and get a status within 4 months and move it as soon as possible so that the objective is not to wait a year and see how we're moving. Because we need to put staff in place, we need to define in a much more clear fashion what those impacts mean and how do they get measured, so we can have a strong legal legs, if you will, when we deal with the courts.
So maybe when we're in the full council, you can give us a roadmap, time frame, a game plan, so that it is clear that it is something that is being addressed now rather than waiting on a year. Okay, I'll give you an opportunity to craft a game plan, but let's have that game plan presented in council. It won't be something that we're voting on in council, but it could be, you could say,
within 4 months we can get a report back on what the progress has been.
Yeah, or fill in the blanks. If it's not 4 months, it's too much. Just let them, give them flexibility, but have you moving forward on it. Okay. On the settlement issues, the new sign ordinance has requirements that are not consistent, in my view, with provisions of settlement agreements with the major sign companies, and I think it would be good policy to have the new regulations supersede all past agreements and make it clear that no billboard company could build second-faced off-site signs or tri-vision off-site signs. So, ask the city attorney's office if you could amend the statement of intent to include language that bans second-faced off-site signs and tri-vision off-site signs. Is that something that you could do, Madam?
I want to, Madam Attorney, in our discussions, is that consistent with the legal theory we've been hearing throughout our process as we have been trying to identify the appropriate language? I just want to make sure everything's consistent.
Sharon Cedar of Cardenas for the record again. Yes, Councilman, as we were advised earlier, we believe that the city cannot contract away its police power. The adoption of legislation is new police power regulations, and therefore we believe that those regulations will apply to the settling companies as well as the other sign companies.
So it would be, so in the statement of intent, you can make that clear then?
Yes, we have already done a statement of intent. For the digital signs, we will include these other provisions.
Thank you. Okay, on the issue of, I guess you call it re-permitting, to gain compliance with the new law, we've clarified that all signs that have been unlawfully erected without permits to date have no vested right under California law. However, the settlement seemed to grant waivers and exemptions from city permit requirements to 3 companies, and I'd like to understand that issue more fully. So I guess I'd like to ask some questions to be reported back at full council. Number one, what are the options for the council to deal with re-permitting rights granted under the settlements? Number two, if all companies are to be treated equally and can all re-permit signs that may otherwise be illegal, what would be the impact of that? How many signs could be made potentially larger and taller than presently permitted? Ms. Trifoletti will give you these questions, so you don't have to take speedy notes. And what will be the impact on revoking the re-permitting rights granted under the settlements? Would it lead to takedowns or just modifications? So those are questions, and Ms. Trifoletti can give you those questions, and you can work with her on that. Okay, on the issues of Westwood, Ventura Boulevard, and Century City, you addressed that in your presentation earlier this morning, but not with respect to Century City. I think we could also indicate that SUVs should not front or abut designated scenic highways. That would be a way to deal with that issue, right?
It certainly would, and that would certainly be consistent with the transportation element of the general plan, which has a policy which says that billboards should not be allowed to front along designated scenic corridors within the city of Los Angeles. That would be very consistent with our general plan policy.
So would that be an amendment to the package? I think that would be something that would go in the package itself, right, Ms. Goldberg?
That would be an amendment.
Okay, so I'll offer that as an amendment to the package itself. And then the one issue that I would like to just state something slightly different from the package that's moving forward is that I have heard the discussion that has been offered on this issue of, I guess it's being shorthanded as being called grandfathering on the SUDs. I've heard discussion here, I've heard discussion from Mr. LaBonge's office, from members of the public. Before I address that issue one way or the other, I would like to see certain additional questions answered. They could be answered in council. And I guess in particular what I would like a report from the city attorney's office. What I'd like for the city attorney's office to report in council before I address this issue of the grandfathering would be an analysis of what would happen to the city's posture in litigation, either with or without the grandfathering proposal. So a litigation analysis, and just analysis of all the issues, legal issues relevant to that. And I also heard a discussion. I think Mr. Weezer, it's a long day, but I think you were on this track, and I think we heard other people just on this track talking about whether the pending SUD applications whether you could include with that grandfathering the requirement to take down additional signage elsewhere in the city. I'd like to see an analysis of those issues before I address the grandfathering issue.
Yeah.
So,
Mr. Weiss, can I, it's a legal matter, and I just want to be more specific as to who the city attorney should direct that response to. Is it to the chair of this committee as a confidential memorandum, or we just have to be a bit more specific?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it would be to the full council, prior to the full council's vote on this, but if it is analysis of the city's posture in litigation, then it should be a confidential document addressed to the council.
Well, given that we have over 26 cases, to me, I get a little... Madam Attorney, what's your opinion?
Councilman, committee, I think what we'll do is we'll try and report to you orally. The ordinance right now is scheduled for council on next Wednesday, May 20th. I don't know that we'll have time to get you a written memorandum on that, but we'll try and do it orally. If necessary, we'll have the clerk schedule a closed session, so if we need to, we could discuss it in closed session.
That's fine.
Yes.
But I guess so all I'm saying is that prior to my being able to vote on or decide to join or not join the grandfathering provisions of the package, I would like that briefing. So as to that portion of the package, I will wait until I get that briefing from the city attorney.
And that's very appropriate. I do want to ask the planning department, do we have this map online?
Yes, it is online.
I just want to make sure that everyone understands what the sign district means in terms of impact. The fact that 90% of the areas, for lack of a better word, were eliminated and confined to certain geographic locations is a significant step. So I just want to make sure that that is part of the thought process as we go through these questions.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm just seeking clarification of those questions before I'm, in my view, before I'm ready to address it. Ms. Trifoletti points out there is one final thing, which is that we do need the departments to clarify better the distinction between exterior and interior signs. And that is important, and that also needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Chair, I have one final question. I need to understand. I apologize if you asked this question at the last hearing, but there's been discussion, or some have brought up the issue of bifurcating the on-site versus off-site signs. Some of the issues or concerns we heard here were that they were different.
Well, my head's went up when you said that. You know that.
A lot of different types of enforcement that we need to take, and some of the issues and concerns by the public were different. The issues I've heard is that a lot of the reason this has become an issue for the whole city is not only because of the attention that the chair of this committee and Mr. Weiss have put in it, but also it was focused on the off-site, and now we have both off-site and on-site. What are the benefits or disadvantages to having them together or bifurcated, so that when we go to council, some council members could say, okay, now we're talking about on-site, let's focus on that. Do we agree or disagree with the issues presented there? Now we're talking about off-site. Do we agree or disagree with those issues? As to right now, it's just a big, what do you want to talk about it? And then we have to clarify all the time. So
right. Chair Vince Pertoni, Deputy Director, and we've had that question asked a lot throughout the whole process. And you know, when we started down the process of doing the comprehensive revision to our site ordinance at the council's direction and with the City Planning Commission's direction, really there's two major issues that came up, or two major types of signs that really caused a lot of concern. One was digital signs, the other was super graphics. Yeah. There's a lot of concern with both of those types of signs. And what the council gave us direction is to really make sure that we can kind of take care of that issue, and also make sure that we have something that's very enforceable. Now, on the issue in terms of digital signs, we couldn't find any way of really dealing with the digital sign issue without dealing with the on-site sign issue, because digital signs in their nature can change very quickly. And so first off, it's very difficult to regulate those as on-site signs. And when it came to enforcement, and we worked very closely throughout the whole process with building and safety to make sure we had a very enforceable ordinance. And one of the struggles they would have would be if someone on a digital sign is advertising an off-site message, those messages are changing all the time, and when they send the code enforcement officer out there, if it wasn't displaying a digital message at that sign, there's no way they could cite that, no way they could take care of that issue. So there's a big difficulty of enforcing digital signs for on-site. So we knew that the only way we could take care of the digital sign concern is to really deal with the on-site regulations. Now, again, with the whole issue of super graphics, that's something that's relatively new to the city because that's changing technology. And one of the things that we were given direction to is to not only look at the enforcement, and also to be forward-looking in terms of how signs change and the method and material of the construction. And what we realized as we did the research is that we felt that we really couldn't foresee all the different types of materials that signs could be made out of in the future. So what we decided to do was to really regulate the amount of signage on a building and get away from the kind of methods. So we needed to deal with the on-site to deal with the super graphics, because super graphics cover windows, they cover large parts of the building. So we needed to get to the on-site part of the sign code to really make sure that we don't cover windows on we don't cover signs onto windows, that we limit the amount So we looked at that very carefully, and we realized that at the heart of it that we couldn't do either of those. And we also, as we went through the process and crafted it, it's a very complete ordinance. So as we've crafted these regulations, they're all somewhat intertwined in terms of how we look at this as a complete package. So to come out, and if we wanted to extract the on-site portion, that would be it's not impossible, but it'd be a lengthy and cumbersome process, and we think that it would be it would take us a bit of time to get there. And again, we also think it'd be difficult if we did it to really be effective in dealing with digital signs and super graphics.
Okay. So it seems like we're trying to create a framework about how do we better enforce these issues. And if you tell me here today that it is better to enforce these issues or concerns by having them intertwined rather than separate, is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's just take the issue of digital signs. Right now, digital signs, on-site digital signs, are allowed by right on virtually anywhere in the city. So we could literally have tomorrow, by right, up to 300,000 digital on-site signs, all of which could be controlled remotely by a computer operator at some off-site location. Each of those digital signs could be programmed to display an off-site message for 2 hours, 3 hours of the day. And in order to enforce that, Mr. Edelman would have to literally have a code inspector stand in front of that sign 24 hours a day and look at it to make sure that no off-site message is displayed on that digital sign. Very severe problem. Super graphics. The ubiquitous Statue of Liberty signs that we see all over the city of Los Angeles right now, those are non-commercial messages. By definition in the zoning code, they are considered to be on-site signs. If we are going to have, make sure that this is not an ordinance that has all kinds of loopholes that the billboard companies and the sign companies could use to get around those provisions, we need to have a tightly integrated ordinance that treats through a time, place, and manner set of regulations, and that was Council Wise Member's motion. That is the most effective way to address the super graphic issue and the digital sign issues.
And I think one of the key elements in the process is that we intend to visit this in 1 year. We intend to learn what has been the real impact. One, because we should have a very real enforcement action that will have results. And that's going to be significant. It'll give us time to deal with the different stakeholders and those associations who feel they need to participate will have that ability within a year and make those adjustments. So our intent is not to hurt business, is not to do the type of negative impacts we've been hearing. It is to try to be comprehensive and consistent in how we view the viewshed and our ability to change how that viewshed could look if we start with the basics enforcement and with these policies implemented so that they can sustain each other as we go through the legal process.
Councilmember, one of the problematic areas of this ordinance is the issue of on-site and off-site sign, and that's why it was the correctness or accuracy of the definition that was discussed is so very critical, and that's why I emphasized it. Also, I do need to go on the record to share with you any off-site sign, not any, any off-site sign can be easily made into an on-site sign.
And that was a good explanation to me, and I think it's true. It's the definitions that we're applying that's driving most of what we're going to do to enforce them. So that's what we're watching out for. And I think how I stepped into this initially was the mechanism by which you provide that message, not so much what the message is. And since we're defining it by what the message is, that kind of drives how we're going to enforce this. So, okay.
I did want to make one more point, and it is in the front of a report back, is that Councilmember Perry, in looking at the concerns of her district, if we look at the impact of expanding the exception for, not exception, but allowing for a building that, or a structure that's not on 5 acres of land,
In the downtown center.
Right. So her geographic area of concern is southeast Los Angeles. Their major boulevards, like Washington and others, do have these significant structures, but they don't have the acreage. So I wanted to make sure we address Councilman Perry's concerns in the form report back. If we would expand what we have allocated to downtown to southeast Los Angeles, what will that do?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Because I'm ready to go through the action list. Are we okay? All right. All right. The first action is approve the proposed sign ordinance recommended by the Commission on March 26, 2009. 2, approve the recommendation of May 6, 2009 Planning Department report with all the amendments and clarifying language of the different definitions. 3, approve attachment 4 of the May 6, 2009 Planning Department report as to the grandfathering of pending sign districts with all the report backs that have been requested by Councilmember Weiss. 4, request city attorney to prepare the final ordinance as to form and legality. And 5, adopt a negative declaration. And that will be the action of this committee.
Right. And I just want to be clear that on item, pardon me, Mr. Chair,
4.
On item 3, my position is that I need those responses before I address item 3.
I understand, and that's in the form of the report backs when it comes back.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, I also had the request on the report back on the marquee and the rationale for continuing to use this in the new signage framework that we're creating, and secondly, the amendment on the or clause for downtown, and I guess you're suggesting that Ms. Perry also had an issue like that for southeast
exactly
Los Angeles, or
exactly.
south Los Angeles.
So I'm not joining the committee's action on item 3. I'm awaiting the results of what I've asked for, just so that it's clear.
Okay, so Madam Attorney, given his exception and his position for item 3, what would be the best way to move on a vote?
What I would suggest is you just do that item separately, the grandfathering, take that out of the planning department, report back. You can move on all the other items. That way it could be a unanimous vote of the committee. And then as for the amendment to the grandfathering language, then it could be a different vote.
It could be a what?
A different vote.
Different vote,
So
okay.
you'd have one vote for the big package, and then just on this one item, have a separate vote.
Okay, so we'll move.
Just for the prospect of sending the matter to council, if the committee votes to send the matter to council in its entirety, with the one exception of this report, there could be 2 separate reports to council with that exception, or Councilmember Weiss.
Really,
Weiss is
it's
objection to council.
Well,
It's real easy.
Let's
It's
let
real
me
easy.
finish.
No, this is, I'm saying, you can't present it so that you can voice your objection at the time it goes to council by amending it and asking for other requests at that time.
Yep.
Thank you, Barbara.
The 2 members are voting to approve item 3. I am not voting to approve item 3. It's moving forward to council with, in a sense, my view is that it's moving forward with no recommendation as to whether it's item 3 or the Labange amendment, pending the return of the information that I requested.
That can be acknowledged in the committee report and on the agenda that you have an objection to 3. The recommendation.
Well, I didn't say the word objection. I said it's not ready for a position without this information. I didn't say the word objection, so that's, okay?
That's important. Okay, so we can move on all 4 items. Madam Attorney, you're giving me a funny face there. How do you want to do this? Can you repeat it one more time?
I think the clearest way for you to do it is to break the item into the 2 parts, you could vote on all the rest of it, and then take a separate motion on the grandfathering. However, Councilman Rice, under the council rules, if you're present, it's counted as a yes vote, or you have to vote no on it.
No.
Because there's no abstentions.
It's not an abstention. My position is, I'm allowed to send forward my report that says what my position is, and I am here, and my position is that we need the information I requested prior to taking a position on either item 3 or the Labange motion. So that is my position. That is my position.
Okay.
Clearly, that is something we can discuss and have it in committee. It may be an A or B, something of that nature. But I understand that what you're saying is that you don't object to it. You're not going to say yes or no.
Items are often moved to council by committees without recommendation. That happens all the time. Okay, so in a sense, my view is it can be moved to council without a recommendation because we need the information that I requested prior to making a position.
You would have to get a second on that.
That's my minority view.
Yeah, but you have to get a second, otherwise you have the majority of the committee that is for that particular item.
Recommendation means that there was no support.
You talking about yes for the grandfather or yes for the loss?
We're yes.
So let's do
There's no
this.
recommendation, but we are yeses. Okay.
So we'll act on all we agree on 4. Actually, 2 members agree on all 5. And that'll be the action of this committee with 1 member wanting clarification before he votes. And that's the action of this committee. Okay?
We can present it in that fashion. We'll
Yes.
figure out a way.
Because that is the action of this committee.
I have it.
Okay?
It's just that I don't want to further confuse council.
I think we're clear.
All right.
Chair Reyes, Vice President Deputy Director, just to be clear, I did hear a lot of report backs from Councilmember Weiss. I thought I heard an amendment to SUDs from Councilmember Weiss on not allowing SUDs to front scenic highways or abut them. I just want to make sure. The remainder I thought were report backs, but I believe that would be a proposed amendment.
Okay, so that'll include the amendment in our action. Okay? All right, folks, we still got public comment, but this item is over with. Thank you very much. A major threshold. We have Ms. Burke for public comment.
I have an item before everybody leaves, Councilmember. I understand this item is going to council on the 20th. Has that been confirmed?
Yes.
Okay. Lastly, on item number 11, there was a request to change condition number 20E. In my review of the conditions, that's the condition of the track. That's not before the committee. So they can't extend the haul-out time from 3 weeks to 6 weeks. They're going to have to ask, according to the city attorney, for a modification to the track.
Okay.
So that will go to council as a request, the applicant to apply for the modification for that condition.
Well, let's just make sure the planning staff makes that clear to the applicant.
Okay, all right.
Okay? All right, Ms. Burke, public comment? The cards I have for public comment is Barbara.
Thank you,
Burke.
Chairman Reyes. Barbara Brady. I don't want to
Brady.
keep the meeting longer, but I'm looking for your help from the Plum Committee. This is not about the sign ordinance, but perhaps a related matter. Last summer, in the end of August, our homeowner association with 2 other groups filed an appeal with Building and Safety over the appearance of digital signs on Westwood Boulevard. We filed a total of 3 appeals over a 3-month period. We were denied the appeals by Building and Safety because they stated that the digital signs did not require planning department review because they were mandated to approve them under the billboard settlements. As a result of their denial, we filed an appeal with the Commissioners of Building and Safety. A hearing was initially scheduled for the first week of December. 3 days before that December hearing, we were told that the hearing was canceled. Subsequent to that, we were told that we would have to file our appeal with the Planning Department. That was a zoning issue. So I went downtown and we filed all the fees and we paid all of the appeal amounts, and we were told we would have a hearing. I didn't realize that it was we would have a hearing someday to be determined, maybe never, because we were finally scheduled a hearing after providing labels and following every instruction given to us. We have a hearing date. We had one for this Thursday, and we were just told on Friday that that hearing has been canceled as a result of a letter sent by Arella Manila on behalf of 2 outdoor advertising companies. So I don't know what we do next, and I'm coming to you to ask for help, to request perhaps a staff briefing on what's going on. When insurance companies deal with people, they have to do fair
In which district is this? In whose district is this?
This is in Mr. Weiss's district.
Mr. Weiss's district. I was going to suggest if Mr. Weiss's planning deputy can advise you.
She did intervene and request that a hearing be scheduled with zoning administration, but subsequently, recently, that was canceled. It's been 9 months. We've been waiting for hearing.
Well, I'll have them revisit that issue with you to make sure we get some kind of response.
I'd like to know what the department...
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll get the planning deputy from that district to talk to you again and see when it can be rescheduled.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rice?
Thank you. 2 quick items. One, SB 1818, Mr. Weezar's motion, he just introduced. We wanted to get follow-up data on what happened the last year since February, since the council did in February of 08 when it passed the SB 1818 implementation ordinance. They did ask the planning department for follow-up information. That information, it's now May, obviously has not been forthcoming. Mr. Weezar was kind enough to introduce a follow-up motion. Mr. Reyes, if you would consider scheduling that motion for this committee. It's really important because we got to get a good SB 1818 implementation ordinance. It ties in with TOPA, and it also ties in with TOPA's Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act for people who are listening, and it also ties in with your inclusionary zoning ordinance. We can get all 3, but we need this information, and I would just want to, this is my push for it. My second point is you have before your committee Mr. Weiss's motion 2 years ago of empowering neighborhood councils so they can appeal. That was seconded by Ms. Gruhl. I talked to Ms. Gruhl today. She said that Mr. Alarcon got it out of his committee. It's now before your committee. I would again ask if we could get that scheduled so that we could basically get that done. The city attorney's already opined. It's legal. If the city council doesn't want to do it, fine. But I would ask that if you would give that consideration, I would appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Anyone else for public comment? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. What time is the game? 7:30?
Standing up. I didn't. So it's still clear.
6.